Thank you, Sue. Health and safety, we know that the emergency exits at the front and the rear of the building, and please assemble in the playground, and we'll let you know what the building has been clear. Affirmation. Rebecca, would you like to read the affirmation?
With pleasure. We pledge that we will faithfully and impartially use our skill, wisdom and judgment throughout discussions and deliberations ahead of us today in order to make responsible and appropriate decisions for the benefit of the South Wairarapa District at large. We commit individually and as a council to the principles of integrity and respect, and to upholding the vision and values we have adopted in our long-term plan strategic document in order to energise, unify and enrich our district.
Thank you very much. Didn't catch you out. Okay, A1 apologies. We have an apology from Ross Vickery. Unfortunately, his mother has passed away. He has to head up early.
Oh, sure.
Do we have any other apologies? Do we have a mover to accept the apologies? Councillor Fox, thank you. Seconded, thank you. West. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, the motion is carried. Do we have any conflicts of interest? Do we have any acknowledgements and tributes?
Yes, I just acknowledge Steve Davis, who passed away a few weeks ago. He was a former headmaster of Purnawa School. He was also chair of the community board in Greytown and previous South Wairarapa councillor. And he gave a huge amount of his time with Rotary and Aratory and numerous community organisations, and it'll be a great loss to our community.
Thank you very much.
And I'd just like to acknowledge the Mann family who lost their mother due to a house fire, and I'd also like to pay tribute to our volunteer fire brigade here in Martinborough. The work that they do is absolutely exemplary, and it's never easy, and I think that the amount of call outs and things that they have had to respond to and their professionalism is absolutely fantastic. So I just wanted to also acknowledge their work.
Thank you, Councillor Maynard. I also think I worked a number of times with Chrissy Mann, docking and crutching, and she was a very interesting but very delightful lady. So, do we have any other? Thank you very much. Public participation. We did have public participation that's been withdrawn. So we have. Do you have any other? No, no public participation. Right, moving on to community board and Māori standing committee reports from the meetings. No chairs here to talk to those. Right, carry on then. Extraordinary business. We have an information report from Alan Hall, our Destination Wairarapa representative, that I'd like to table as item F2. Anyone have any comments on that, please?
Oh, no.
We are open that up for comments. I assume you have them. At the start. We have any comments on that? We also have, we need to continue our long-term plan deliberations, as there were a number of minor items that we didn't come to a conclusion on during our meetings last week, and we need a resolution to add this to the agenda, and officers have prepared a report for us to consider. Do we have a movement to add the long-term plan deliberations to the agenda as item H1? This can't wait until the next council meeting, as all decisions need to be made before the final document goes to Audit New Zealand review on the 13th. And it was not on the agenda, as officers are still working to the Audit New Zealand requirements when the agenda was issued. Do we have a mover? Thank you, Councillor Maynard. A seconder? Thank you, Councillor Fox. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Motion is carried. Right. To a 8 minutes.
Sorry, guys. Sorry, just on extraordinary. So I just raised at the conclusion of council, businesses having their Metariki festival starting on the 9th of July, which is the 4th. wondering if we're going to coordinate the other matter activities in the council. There's no further council meeting, so I presume it goes through community boards, but Featherston is definitely doing theirs on the 9th, which is late shopping and all the rest of it. I just wonder if we should actually coordinate. Just discuss it.
We should do it to the agenda.
So we'll move, you'll move that we add the discussion on Matariki coordination to the agenda. Do we have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor West, all those in favour can say aye.
Aye.
Against, the motion is carried.
So, excuse me, Mr. Mayor, you rushed through the deliberations on the annual plan as the extraordinary item. I understand the urgency, but I have one concern, is that given that it is such a topical issue and it is in the public interest, we haven't advertised that we're doing this. And I'm sure there are people in the community that would probably, had it been known, they would want to be here for it.
We asked for comment from either the CEO or Karen Yates.
Are we following, due process on this?
Yeah.
Karen, do you want to comment?
Morning, everybody. Yes, unfortunately, we didn't have time to give extensive notice on this. We wanted to use the opportunity to discuss in the public forum the other items. Apart from today, there's no other opportunity apart from perhaps an extraordinary meeting next week. But really, we need to get the financials agreed today. So having an indication from yourselves today so that we can get those financials ready for audit. So unfortunately, we are where we are. We have got the recording, and of course the minutes will go out, and the subsequent decisions will be made at the 30th of June. So there will be time for any further questions from the members of the public for us officers to address before then.
Thank you, Karen. So you are confident that the process is being followed in as much as we're not making any decisions today, but so what are your comments with regards to public participation or advanced knowledge of what we're discussing?
They are indicative decisions today, simply for officers to be able to go and put the finances together. But I can't reiterate enough that those finances have to be ready for audit, and there is not really very much opportunity after that, apart from any minor changes that are not of a financial matter. But I do believe that we've had sufficient discussion, and there would be a further ability on the 30th of June for any members of the public to come and input into that.
Yeah, just a quick question, Karen, with regards to that. How are the community going to be communicated? How's that going to be communicated out?
Yeah.
Well, we have the ordinary minutes and the record of this meeting, but depending on the discussions that happened today, if we felt the further communication needed to go out, then we can put that information out on our Facebook and on our website.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gibson.
Karen, look, we have to do it so we can get it to audit, but we have the opportunity after audit have made an opinion on our LTP to make adjustments anyway, don't we?
We do, if there's anything fatal. Unfortunately, the ramifications of decisions, as Katrina will no doubt advise, it takes an awful lot to actually input those figures into the financial model, which is why we've programmed in this long lead-in time this time around. In between our hearings and going to audit, but it would have to be something really quite urgent and serious for us to be able to amend any financials after it has gone to audit, and we would need to talk through with audit the ramifications for that. Of course, if we don't have that decision on the 30th of June, then we're in a position that we don't have an LTP.
Cool. Now, before we go on, I know there's another couple of councillors, but
yeah, so I was just going to reiterate that because the LTP is audited, the auditors are here on the 14th to do the final financial audit effectively. If we change any financials, which we can up to the 30th of June, the implication of that is that audit will need to review them again, and we probably won't be able, would not be able to adopt the LTP on the 30th of June.
So again, just remember what's contained in this report is about 99% is confirmation of the matters that you discussed in the public deliberations. So they're already in the public arena. there's one exception which we'll comment on, which is met beyond our control. It's a price of Qatari, which is that information has only been made available to us the last couple of months. So in terms of what you've deliberated on, this is a reflection and a confirmation of those things, which has already been in the public.
Pam, did you have a question?
No.
Okay, Alistair.
So, look, I appreciate everything you said, Karen. Thank you. We have done things really well up to now with public consultation. We've had, what, 800 submissions on our various plans. So it shows there is a level of interest in this. If we do this now without having informed the public, we risk undoing all that goodwill. There is an opportunity to have an extraordinary meeting next week, as Karen has said, and personally, I think that would be the better way to do it, to just show to the public we are being upfront with them.
As my comment on that is, in reading the report, there is nothing substantive or totally left field here that would require public consultation on. As Harry said, 99% has already been discussed, and we're down to the not by rats and mice, but the little adjustments.
It's the 1% that's going to get us in trouble.
Okay, cool. Councillors, any other questions on this? Look, we'll hold off at the end of the meeting to decide whether or not we need to have an extraordinary meeting next week, based on our discussions and how far we get and what we see as substantive.
We get back to the resolution that's passed, then what the wording that was to bring it in.
It's certainly in, but
What was the wording we had?
we have a mover to add the long-term plan deliberations to the agenda as item H1.
You changed me to a vote.
That's fine. Would you like to re-vote on that one, just to clarify?
What do you want to change it?
I'm voting against it because I think we should be going there. I think we should have time for the public to be aware of it.
I need to state the entire resolution, which is we add the long-term plan deliberations to the agenda as item H1. This cannot wait until the next council meeting, as all decisions need to be made before the final document goes to Audit New Zealand for review on the 30th of June. So please bear with me. Okay. And this was not on the agenda as officers were still working for the Audit New Zealand requirement when the agenda was issued. So there's the resolution. We've had one change of vote from Councillor Flimmer to against. Do we have any other changes on that? Right, well, the motion is carried. Any other items of extraordinary business that you'd like to add? Right. Item A8, we're considering the minutes from the 30th of March 2021. I assume you've all read that. Are there any corrections that are required? Councillor Lee.
Through you, Madam Your Worship. I found it incredibly difficult to read over 384 pages of documentation in less than 2 days. So I did not get an opportunity to be able to read the full document, and I don't know how anyone else feels about that, but I would just like to voice that I'm not happy with it. To be given less than 2 days, and there's a document in there that states that we were given 3 days. Well, this is an example where we're not given 3 days, and it's not fair to our communities.
You're talking specifically about the minutes from the 30th of March, or in totality?
In totality.
It's a busy time of year. Karen, do you have any comment on that? I understand the pressure you are under and the amount of meetings, the volume of meetings we've had. And while it may not be ideal, it's something we have to work with. Karen, have you any comments on that?
Yes, a couple of points. One, we are meeting statutory requirements. So just for everybody to be comforted that, you know, we are meeting those statutory minimums. Yes, I do appreciate that having as much time as possible is better rather than the alternative. It is a busy time of year, and I think for next year we might have a look at scheduling a council meeting during the time of the LTP discussions, because I do think that, you know, if any extraordinary meetings are required, then we could schedule those in. So I do take the point from councillor.
Thank you, thank you.
Sorry.
Yes, councillor Maynard.
I'm not quite sure how anyone else feels about this, but we've already extended it out to 8 weeks, haven't we, from 6? So we're already cutting down on the amount of meetings that we are having. So this shouldn't, you know, that was specifically so that way the workload could be managed to get it. So I'm just a little bit confused to then hear that possibly we'll look at not having a meeting next year in case we need an extraordinary meeting. To me, that's too much. We're already losing meetings from going from 6 weeks to 8 weeks, and that was to help with the workload. So I don't actually, you know, I don't feel that that's a compelling enough argument.
Yeah, I would take that into, just before you carry. However, I think what we'll all agree that the level of consultation on this LTP and doing a spatial plan has been a huge amount of work, not only for staff but for council, and we do acknowledge that.
Yeah.
I would love to think that the remuneration authority would also acknowledge the pressure we're under, but also the spatial. So it's an unfortunate situation, but I may take up more of your time. I'd like to reiterate that you're doing a very good job, and part of that doing the really good job is a lot more time required to do that. Karen, do you have a?
Just to respond to the councillor's comment, I wasn't suggesting of not having a meeting, just rescheduling the meeting so that the meetings do not fall within this very busy period. So we'd have a meeting either before or afterwards. So it's just the scheduling of them.
But your point is noted, Councillor Maynard, and yours, Councillor Pam.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to acknowledge the time that staff have put into all these documents that we have had. Admittedly, it's a lot of reading, but the work that's going on behind it and the quality of the reports has been outstanding, and I'd just like to acknowledge that.
Yeah, thank you.
Here's to that.
A comment I would make is one of the bulkier reports is the water strategy report that is there, and that's 250 pages in of itself. So it's the bulk of the papers that are there. Is that was a draft and only confirmed recently. So we just didn't. So we had to. We were reacting to the strain of the stuff, to other timelines. We just have the choice to confirm. But that's the bulk of the papers. The rest actually
Standard
range of council.
So, I mean, the councillors, if you haven't managed to read the minutes, then feel free to abstain and trust the other councillors that can verify minutes. But we do have a mover that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 30th of March 2021 are true and correct record. No. Councillor Jepson seconded. Thank you very much, Councillor Fuller. All those in favour please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, all those abstaining. Motion is carried. Thank you, guys. Now onto the minutes of the 7th of April. Are there any corrections needed on this one? What on Suzanne? No corrections. Do we have a mover that the minutes of the council meeting held on the 7th of April 2021 are true? All those in favour please say aye. Aye. All those against, all those abstaining, the motion is carried. We now move on to the publicly released section of the public excluded minutes from the 7th of April 2021. Do we have a mover that section F3 of the publicly excluded council minutes from the meeting held on the 7th of April? All those in favour please say aye. Aye. All those against, all those abstaining, the motion is carried. Councillor, do you have any comments on those minutes of publicly excluded? Your chance here.
Just one comment. Is it possible to include the councillors who were at that meeting? because when you read this in isolation, it's not clear who the councillors were.
But it's attached to the
That's
assets
attached
and
to-
I
services.
know, but if there's been comment around the fact people just read, you know, we've just read that one. Hmm.
Yeah.
Do you see?
Just-
That's what you mean.
That's why. Yeah.
We can add it.
How about we do that?
Yeah, put us at it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see. We will add that.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So we now come to B1 minutes of the council committee. Move to FX or just a comment?
That's all.
Yeah, that's fine. B1 minutes, the council committee's community boards. Do we have a mover to receive the minutes of council committees and community boards report? Thank you, councillor Plymouth, seconded. Thank you. Rebecca, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the motion is carried. Is it Tony? We've also got the other table, Assets and Services Committee meeting minutes in Stella. Do we want to go through the minutes meeting by meeting? Or do you want?
So included the minutes would say the minutes in that section. So
So would you like to go through them one by one, or would you like to just receive the minutes in one large 2 through to 12 motions?
Mr. Mayor, I have a question about potential conflict of interest on one of the sets of minutes, the Featherston Community Board ones. It would be interesting to get comment from our officers about the chair's report, in that Mr. Shepherd, it's not the first time, but he's raised the issue of the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. And he is an employee of REAP who has a vested interest in his wife works for REAP. And they've been specifically excluded from funding from our particular tranche of the Mayor's Task Force for Jobs. And I just wonder whether that's a conflict of interest that should have been acknowledged.
An interesting one. Karen, do you have any comment on this, or do you have any knowledge of this?
I'm afraid I don't have any knowledge, and we obviously need to look into this in further detail to see whether there was a conflict. Of course, conflicts of interest depend on whether there is any decision-making ability of, it would be in this case the community board, whether there was any conflict between roles. So I'm afraid we need to have a lot more information to be able to make a recommendation, and it would be the member himself who would be in the position to declare an interest if it was, if he believed that was the case.
Perhaps if you could come back to us with a comment on that in time for our next council meeting. Yeah.
With regards to the conflicts of interest, I'd like to back that up as at the end of the day, as the chair of the Featherston Community Board, I thought that was an automatic alert for a conflict of interest.
My knowledge, there's no Spears Force's jobs.
No, but it also raises the point of the chair being part of REAP and then approving funding that goes to REAP.
Are there any evidence? Is there any evidence of funding to REAP through the Featherston Community Board?
Look, we'll need.
We'll investigate it.
If you could, that'd be great.
I don't think it's as the in charge of the task force for jobs, I haven't seen necessarily any funding that could be influenced by Mr. Shepherd. We'll certainly get a report.
Sorry, it wasn't specifically for the Mayor's task force, it was just funding
In general.
in general.
We'll expect a report at the next council meeting on that. So do we have a mover to receive the minutes, in the list from 2 through to 12 as tabled? Thank you, Councillor Gibson, seconded Councillor Fox. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, the motion is carried. Abstaining, we have an abstainer. Motion is carried. Right, recommendations from planning and regulatory committees.
Just before we go on to that, am I able to speak to the finance audit and risk report that's in that section?
Certainly.
I just wanted to bring up a couple of issues that were highlighted. One was the customer service survey, and you may recall we'd expressed concerns about the methodology and also the timing around how that would work with Audit New Zealand. So Karen has been working with other councils to look at how they addressed the companies that were used, and has subsequently come up with a new company, which I believe you have employed, I think, you're in the final stages of, and it looks as though they'll be a very good company and have a good methodology, and that will be line up with the requirements of Audit New Zealand. And the other thing that we had quite a sense of urgency with was the risk register. So we've now got the ball rolling on that, and this, you would have seen, there's a matrix for how risk is assessed, and so we're comfortable that we're now progressing around along that road. So it's just a few comments.
If I could also comment, I noticed on our upcoming agenda with the Melbourne Forum, there's a Wellington company speaking regarding the looking at customer satisfaction and benchmarking across the councils in the Wellington region. And it may be worthwhile for you to go to that, just to hear what's being said as opposed to the line report.
Oh, maybe give me the details later.
Sorry, but while we're talking about the minutes of the meeting, the planning and regulatory committee meeting that was held on the 12th of May, I did raise as an extraordinary item about the Featherston Quarry. My only request in that is, are we still legal? Is there a time limit on how long an application can stay open? I asked that question.
The answer is yes. So the technically it's called section 92. You put an application on hold while you're requesting further information from that. And that's the point. And so when you've got satisfied, we are satisfied with the information. The rest of the clock starts ticking.
Oh, okay. So that's one of one confirmation. Okay, so it was put on hold. So it can't stop, and now I'm on phone. So we've got a couple of months to sort that out.
I don't know whether it's starting. It depends on the applicants. It's supplying the information that we have requested. So when we get that and it's satisfactory, then the clock starts.
Karen.
Sorry, I just wanted to respond if possible. That's am I unfrozen?
Not blinking. Luckily, the mouse. So we might consider that report. Do we have a mover to receive the B2 report from the Planning and Regulatory Committee?
Worship Karen's unfrozen.
Karen, yes.
I have unfrozen. You too were frozen. It was also quite amusing to me. If I could just quickly take the opportunity to respond regarding the customer survey. I was about to send out an email today to everybody just to provide a quick update that yes, we have commissioned First Research to undertake our survey, and we're just going through the questionnaire questions at the moment, and they will cover off the last this current annual plan's KPIs and the KPIs which are proposed for the long-term plan. And with a few additional questions, and particularly around waste, we are interested about the amount of waste going to landfill, and it would be good to get some information on customer attitudes to that. So that's due to go out in 9 days' time. It will be using the electoral register to select a representative sample of respondents. That will be 3,000, and we are expecting hopefully around 400 in response, and that will be a quota across all of the 3 wards. and it will be via the website, and then a follow-up if people are not able to do that for post, so not telephone survey for this year. So keep your eyes peeled for something coming to you in the post.
Thank you very much. Okay, so do we have a mover to receive the Planning and Registry Committee report B2? Thank you, Pam. Seconded. Gareth. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, the motion is carried. Councillor West, you chaired that meeting.
I did.
Do you have anything to add to that?
No, other than the contents was trend brief at the time it was taken. And like I said, from the meeting about, we asked about the Featherston inquiry, which was answered, which was really good. But no, good meeting.
I could comment on that as well. I think we saw what our gains were on our greenhouse footprint, and they were quite light. I think it was 2% over the last 2 years. And I did raise the issue of whether or not we should be looking at a more effective adoption of the climate change strategy with regards to the councils.
Just on that, the government have actually given the Climate Change Commission a timeline to get some real meaningful stuff out there, and I think it's at the end of the year. So I believe that there is a regional climate change meeting on Friday. Maybe we'll get something out of that. I mean, we can't fix these things on our own, and I think we've got to be part of the whole region on how we progress changes.
This issue was raised in the regional transport corridors. I think at the time the Climate Change Commission brought out an estimate of what they were expecting, so that we did have some certainty at the point in that. And during the regional transport, we did begin to pick projects that would give a better climate change result earlier, rather than as opposed to overall over a 10-year period, on the grounds that we reviewed after 3, to see if we could get to that 29% or whatever it was reduction over the time period. So yes, we are getting information from the climate.
I think if you read that ransom report, recommendations were that we're not trying to go away from offsetting carbon emissions, to try and do some real stuff and reducing.
Yeah, reduce, not offset.
Yes.
Was that climate review taken from a metro point of view or a rural point of view, or a mixture?
With regards to the regional one, transport, or it was overall, because that's the point of the regional group that we've still got to do now. But it's the to pour over that report. How we make it.
It's an appropriate time to talk about what Harry and I spoke about, what you and I have spoken about.
Well, they're going to have to now, because they're public. I don't know what I'm referring to. No idea.
So you're all aware that I look at these climate change reports and go, it's a lot of paper producing buggery. The comment that, we have a very, very clever lady who is working in our climate change unit. She's really smart, but she is handicapped by us to say, do what everyone else is doing. I would really like to say to her, take the blinkers off, come up with some outrageous ideas about how we can lead the debate and show that we are thinking outside of the box about this. And I was talking to Harry the other day, and I said, why don't we have solar panels on our settling ponds, for example? Why aren't we producing our own electricity to run our own sewage systems? Why aren't we using autonomous buses to transport between Featherston, Martborough and Greytown, for example? Google and these sort of big companies are screaming out for places where they can do trials. Why do we limit ourselves to what every other council in the district and the country is doing? We're not making any change. And as we saw, we're making 0.01% of a change. Whoopee, why don't we let Ms. Bath and Melanie open her eyes and say, come up with some really outrageous ideas for us to consider that actually shows that we are going to do something real.
I do recall the conversation there. And look, I think that's an interesting concept. I think as a council, we had 70% change. I think we've bedded in nicely, and it's a very good conversation prior to the next triennium to look at our goals and what our important is. We may lose the waters, we may lose the RMA. Perhaps we need to refocus where we are with regards to from a community perspective. And I would really encourage that we do that later on in this trimester.
I would just hate to see Melanie leave because she's bored and not being allowed to actually do what she's passionate about.
You know, like hybrid cars. We thought we were doing a good thing with hybrid cars. They don't take.
They
doesn't take it out.
Can
That was really disappointing, actually.
Yeah, can I just raise a question about that? When Mel presented her last report, I deliberately asked, are we doing enough?
Yes.
What more should or could we be doing? And she actually said, we're doing everything we can.
I think so. Alice,
I think what you're saying is good, but I also think there needs to be, while we can get some direction and say, go and do something different. We've also asked Mel, are we doing enough? So there needs to be something that comes back from Mel as well. She has the expertise that we don't have. She has the understanding that we don't have. She also is probably tapped into a number of resources individually that we don't have. That really speaking, I mean, if we want to be creative about it, then she has the mandate to do that right now.
I'm not sure if she does have. I'm not sure if she does have the mandate to do that right now. I think. No, I don't think she does. I think she is potentially hamstrung by that beautiful word bureaucracy, and that this is what councils do. This is where they can work, and so she is saying to us, "You're doing everything you can within this boundary." She's not saying to us, "You're not doing everything you can at this boundary." And that's what I would, that's what I would like to say. That's what I'd like to see is the blinkers taken off and say what is possible as opposed to.
We've got that point.
Yeah, so I'm just saying, long story short, I've taken up that and we are going to have a chat with Mel to see what sort of ideas and things, see if there is things that she would be suggesting to us that she's feeling that we just can't do because of budget constraints or those types of things. Are there some barriers? So yeah, but we're going to take it out of that conversation.
Awesome.
Yeah, cool.
Great.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks, Alison.
Yeah.
Point, thank you, Councillor.
Sorry. Just so that it wasn't intentional.
Okay, so do we have a mover for recommendation 1 from committee recommendation box to adopt the revised version of the Rumahanga strategy and implementation plan? Thank you. Councillor Hay, seconded. Thank you very much. Councillor Fox, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, that motion is carried. Now we move on to recommendations from the Ethics and Services Committee. Do we have a move to receive the report? There's lots of moving. Thank you, Councillor Fox, seconded. Councillor Eames, thank you very much. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. All those against, the motion is carried. So there's a recommendation from the committee and then additional recommendations from the officers. Councillor Gibson, do you want to speak to this?
Probably not a lot to say, although everyone agreed that we should be approve the upgrade of Memorial Park, and it did go out for consultation, and we didn't have anyone come back to us from the public regarding that, and we actually had a very good discussion at our Assets and Services meeting. Everyone fully agreed with how we're going ahead, and I think it's a must do. So,
hey, Councillor Gibson, you can have decisions that are not controversial.
I've got to say, I must go back and see if there's any others. No, I think we generally got to go ahead and go for this, and I don't think there'll be any opposition for it, because it is guaranteeing resilience for water and Great Out, and let's face it,
And Featherstone.
and water is a new gold. So,
yeah. Councillors, do we have any questions or comments from the two sort of Jets and the council officers
About the report.
about the recommendations? That's to do with the treatment plant and changes and adaptations being made and the requirement of easements in order to affect the works, which has actually delayed it a bit. Yeah.
So with regards to the treatment plant, two questions. Are there any additional financial and do we have a timeline of when this is going to be done?
This has been delayed already. We have a legal requirement with regards to the creation of easements on Soldiers Memorial, which has held us up. I know Wellington Water is keen and chomping at the bit to start.
Yeah. So we've asked them what requires the timeline to go to access and services.
Okay. And do they have the skill set or do they have the people that can actually do it?
Oh, very much.
Okay.
Oh, yes, Pam.
I think with this work, the biggest thing for me is the fact that when this is finished, then the chemicals that are stored at the current swimming baths, which are really close to where we've got people, and that is going to move to this new facility. And I think that is a huge plus. The other thing is that I'd like, I don't recall, but then my brain's not working so well at the moment, is when all this work is done, that the park is going to be returned to how it is now, so that there is no impact on the other people using the park.
Yeah, I don't think Bryce would let it.
I think also, Pam, with the works that are going on there, the RSA has got a project that they're fundraising for. I think they're fundraising for is a new memorial to go there, which will, to a large extent, will shield all the water areas. So it'll actually turn it into quite a nice area.
Oh, great.
Yeah, it's quite a substantial project too. Yeah.
I just partly answered my question as to that. So the easement doesn't affect any RSA activities or
And we're working with some prices, we're finding a suitable location, and they're very flexible in terms of design, structure, that fits in with most types of things.
They're all that positive, very positive. Yeah. Any other comments, questions? So unless, given there are no changes to the notes and recommendations, we'll take this as one. Do we have a mover for recommendation 1 from the committee recommendation box and recommendations 3 through to 8 of the officers' recommendations? Councillor Jepson, second Councillor Maynard, all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, the motion is carried. Thank you. Right. Now, decision reports from the Chief Executive and staff. C1, Coronary Jim. We have a mover to receive the report.
Oh, sorry, just one comment back to section B. Is it possible in the future for the FAR report to be popped in that section rather than intermingled with the community board reports?
I'm surprised it's not.
Yes, it's which decision probably to combine.
If there are recommendations from the finance audit and risk, then it would.
That's right. That's the difference. Yeah.
Oh, so recommendation.
Change that because I think sometimes it just separates it out.
Well, I think that it's separating those things up, all information versus those things that are asking for council decisions. So that's the differentiator. It's not the nature of the committees.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, got it. Leave that as it is then. Before I interrupt here, could I have a
Sorry there.
we're now considering C1 Coronary College funding and agreements. Do we have a move to receive the report? Councillor Fox, second. Councillor all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, the motion is carried. Abstaining. Cool. Mr. Wilson, do you want to highlight anything for us in the coronary report? Yeah.
So this is so the report went through assets and services. As you'll all recall, an annual plan for this current year, Council reached quite $1 million to part fund the building gymnasium at Cooley College. This is basically the memorandum of understanding between ourselves and college around that funding and community access to it, and some provisions there. And also then the casual use agreement, which was between the college and any clubs or any associations using the gymnasium and booking it. The MOU should be sort of reasonably straightforward. There were a couple of comments made at the Assets and Services Committee, which we've changed the MOU or discussed in the paper itself. And just to cover off those briefly around membership of the management group. The original draft that was presented to Asset Services included Greytown Sports and Leisure, and a comment was made for me to get broader community support as to the membership of that group to make sure those other groups were okay with Greytown Sports and Leisure being part of it. We have taken Sports and Leisure out, Greytown Sports and Leisure out of it for now, but we can add them in once we get that support or endorsement from across the wider district.
Do you add another member to that, or is this removed?
We've taken them out, we haven't added anyone else in, but we've amended them to say that we can add groups based on agreement between council and college. Yeah, I think there's a couple of other comments around a suggestion around a separate classroom facility, and the college are making one available close to it. It's not going to be right next to it. But they have identified that as a really good thing to do, so that's been built in there as well. Yeah, oh, and also, sorry, the membership of that management group is being clarified as being an officer, not an elected member. Yeah, that's the other issue.
Cool, Councillor West.
Just a quick question with regards to the usage of the Coronera College gym. I'm assuming that this is open to the district of the South Wairarapa?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's why we removed recreation and leisure from that committee, because we wanted it to be a much broader, not just specific.
I do have a comment. Hey, Ewan, how are you? In our submission, notwithstanding committee submission to the long-term plan, we talked about being involved in minor and major infrastructure projects going forward. And I see we've probably missed the boat here, but the concept design stage, the aesthetics of the building, there's nothing about that building that represents Māori in the community. It's just a really standard facility. And so just going forward, just want to note that we do want to be involved in some sort of design level, some sort of consultation level, that we're having, a big structure put on our whenua in Wairarapa should reflect community inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, just a quick comment, if I may. I'd like to possibly still have discussions with Emily, the Ministry of Education, around some of those. It's not going to be the fundamental design on the building, but it could be something we could incorporate, and maybe we could pick that up.
Yeah, it would be really nice, especially acknowledge public-wise.
Yeah, I think the problem with this, though, I will take this point on, but it's Ministry of Education building. We've actually haven't been involved at all.
Yes, I know.
Or and what we might use it for as a part of our contribution.
True. Yeah.
Yeah, we haven't got any say at all.
Through you, Your Worship, with regards, it's not with regards to the gym, but the Mary's Standing Committee just advised that they'd like to have more input into being able to put some culture into the various projects that we've got. Are you involved in the Greytown play space? Because I think that this is one of the opportunities that Upper Hutt missed. Was engaging with their Māori constituents with regards to what they wanted in the play space, or how they could have input into it. But yeah, just
I think that would happen, but we haven't decided yet. Even on whether the project is go, but you have been included in the long-term plan discussions that didn't include that. So I'm sure, and I really want to hope that you would be involved once, if and when it gets attacked, then you're right.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
yes,
if I can ask you a question. Ewan, I just want to confirm just regarding Team Greytown being excluded at the current point in time. They've obviously been communicated with around this.
They weren't communicated in the first instance, So actually, this was a suggestion by college. So actually, they weren't asked in the first place. So yeah.
Okay, I knew that they had an interest in that and I thought they had been spoken with. So if Team Great Elm was to reshape itself, because that is some of the conversation in the community present, then that may open a dialogue for them again.
Absolutely, and that's why we've deliberately left them we broad to allow that to happen if there's.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Thank you for clarifying.
I do understand though that Great Elm Sports Leisure or Team Great Elm it is constrained with regards to resources. So I think that's a good one.
Through you, just a quick question. I know there was some concerns about the booking, how that all might work. And I see that the suggestion is that it's done through the school system. Are you happy that that's a viable way for community groups to work?
So the community use that to book other facilities at the college currently. So the auditorium is booked through that system, and they have a dedicated resource to do that and manage that. So
thank you.
Yeah.
Carrying on from that, Worship, there had been some comment from outside people who were trying to use the gym under the old system or the system that they had, and there was some concerns about that, and I would like to make sure from our point of view that nobody is excluded or there is no double bookings, because I think that then causes some tension within the community and the school, and I'd like to see that resolved if we possibly can. There's also this under the agreement between the Board of Trustees and the Council, you're talking about security, and the gymnasium will be fitted with security lighting and security cameras. I'd like to see that there's a note within there that those will reflect the dark sky requirements, if that's at all possible, so that will be so that
it's a good point, because it falls in before the district plan change, which would require them. Yeah, so
I can pick that up with through the concept side.
yeah.
And also just to cover off the observation around bookings and the like, one of the things that we're going to be doing through the management group is developing a fair use policy. Just make sure potentially that one group isn't booking it for every night of every day of the week sort of thing. So there will be monitored as well from that management group.
Yeah, I think the issue came where the school decided that they needed to use it outside those hours, and the people who had booked the use of the gym weren't advised, so they ended up having to hold their programs outside, whether it be winter or summer, because the school were actually using it.
Yeah,
I think Councillor Cleveland, the whole point of this extra committee, management committee will resolve those as opposed to just being resolved through college. So I'm sure.
But it's still, the booking's still going to be run through the college, so I just wanted
there
to
are
highlight
issues, if
those.
there are issues, they can be escalated and resolved very quickly.
That's great. I like that escalation process within the
Any other questions? Right, so is there anything else you want to mention on that one? So we move to, do we have a mover to note the proposed concept design of the facility and the content of the draft MOU and casual use agreements, and delegate authority to the chief executive to enter into the MOU once the legal review is complete? Councillor Plymouth, second Councillor Maynard, all those in favour, please say aye. Those against, the motion is carried. And abstaining, Councillor West. Great abstainer.
Three abstainers.
Right, guys,
It's a Queen song.
now to C2. So we're now considering the report C2 voting boards and representation arrangements report. Do we have a mover to receive the report? Thank you very much, Councillor Hall, seconded Councillor Colenso. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, the motion is carried. Mr. Wilson, a very concise report. Could you walk us through this?
Absolutely. So there's a lot of confusion about what the that change to the local electoral act actually enabled or didn't enable. So I just want to talk to this in two parts. I'll get Karen to fill in any detail, but there's a difference between establishing a Māori board and a representation review. Okay, so it's that box, and the proper process that must be followed by local government, which is governed by the Local Government Act, which essentially requires councillors, in terms of making a decision, to be clear that they have engaged, got the information, and in their minds are very clear about the views of the community of the district. Right? It is not to react to a particular group that may have a view about what kind of decisions council should make. That's why the Local Government Act is written that way. So you need to be thinking about a representation and view in terms of the Local Government Act in the context of good local government decision making and process. The second thing that's happened is that in the middle of that, there were some legal impediments to the establishment of Māori boards, through essentially the polling mechanisms that were, want a better term, discriminatory. And the government made a decision to remove those polling decisions from the Local Government Act, from the Act, Electoral Act, to remove that difference between any other representation that a council At the same time, it also set up some transitional provisions because there are a number of decision-making that a number of local councils through New Zealand made that were in flight. So if you look at the Hansard's comments, one of the particular things that there are a number of councils who are contemplating decision-making around the establishment of Māori boards, and we're going to go to a poll. So the government wanted to remove the cost to those local authorities of going to a poll by removing the position. So all the transitional provisions, to the impact of polling, right? They were never, ever, ever, and I repeat, ever, designed to be a shortcut to bypass proper and due process for local government decision-making in respect of establishing a board and a representation. Okay, so just setting the scene that way. So there's two things. There's the proper and correct process that councils are obliged to follow to make an informed decision around its representation and the representation of the district, which includes the establishment of Māori wards, amongst a whole lot of other things that council has to consider in terms of representation, which is outlined in the report. So that's the key here. So in terms of sequencing, in July 2020, council explicitly just made a decision about the process it wanted to follow. It looked at what information it had now. It determined that since 2018 we didn't have the information, so we needed to go through a full process to make it an informed decision and consult with our communities. And we will be making that decision to actually do that, start that process in time for the to give effect to the 2025 Act. So you made a decision. You said we want to do this properly, we want to do it right, and we want to engage fully with all parts of our community. And so simply, that we've just continued that process, and this is where we are today. We don't have the information. We can start that process. This report says this is the pathway we want to take to go forward. And obviously, one of the key things, apart from the procedural aspect of consulting and those types of things, is we want to make sure that we're developing a partnership with our hapu, our marae, and our iwi. And we have been working really strongly with the Māori Standing Committee to start developing the capability, the capacity, and just the mutual understanding of how government works, how mana whenua, tangata whenua want to engage with us as a council, and we're on a path to do that. And Marita can talk to that as part of the Māori Standing Committee. So, there's a parallel process going on here, One is trying to work with, through the Maori Standing Committee, which is our entree to the hapu relationships particularly, and our marae. So that, the placemaking, the local aspects, and that's been our path, and it's been the path that you have supported for us to do. So the issue of a Maori ward doesn't enable that pathway. That pathway is the partnership that we're starting to work on in terms of reference to the Maori Standing Committee, the cultural audits that we're going to do to inform decision making about how we go forward, the budgets that you've put into the long-term plan so we can make sure we're resourcing to do that work. So what I want to invite you to do is just step back. So what this paper is doing is just trying to demystify those complexities. So the key things here are good decision making under the Local Government Act requires councils to make an informed decision, having understood and having engaged with the full range of views of the community. Right? So that is what the pathway that you've chosen to go down. Okay. The amendments to the Local Government Act were never intended to shortcut that process. That's the key unique thing. Despite all the community rhetoric, despite all the commentary from views that that's what the amendment was intended to do, it never was. We quoted on Hansard's, you can actually see what the intent of the Crown was in this context. So you have that full information. So there's nothing has changed. We are simply going down the path that we originally agreed we're going to go down and do this once, do this right, and do this properly. Okay, so that's a long introduction. But the other thing just to bear in mind, and we do emphasise, this decision triggers a whole lot of other decisions that necessarily follow. So when you're making this decision, you could do it in the context of what's a full representation of agents. Because a representation triggers a decision about a Maori ward, triggers a representation review. So our view has always been do it all and do it together. Because if you, depending on which way the numbers fall from the electoral roll, we're at 2 wards. We have 2 Maori wards. We have 21 electoral leaders. So that's true. So this is not a decision. So that is something that the rest of the community is vitally interested in. So you can't make a decision over here without actually telling the community the consequences of that decision if you went that way. That's the whole point of the good review and good decision making. Okay. So I'll just hand over to Karen to see if there's anything that you think you want to add in terms of the key points of the report. Karen, then we'll open up to questions or comments. Karen?
No, I don't have anything to add at this time. Thanks, Harry.
Okay. I've got a question from this. At the moment, what is the difference between a Māori electoral population, which we've stated is 850, versus the number of registered? And how does that affect the calculations under the Local Government Act?
I'd just like to acknowledge Steph's input into the technical side of this report, and I might need to revert to Steph on this, but quite simply in the report, it talks about where the information on what a Māori electoral population is, and it is a calculation. I would assume it's taking the Māori electoral roll and added some components in there around potential people who are not on the electoral roll, just to be able to have some sort of representation and an indication of what those numbers might likely be. But I'll hand over to Steph, see if there's anything more insight she can add.
That's exactly right. It does build in those that are not enrolled for all those under 18 years old.
So the 850 is an estimate. So the 850 is an estimate, but the 434 is an actual. And we base our calculations based on the estimate.
On the 850, which is required under legislation to use that.
Well, that was just one thing that I just needed a bit of clarification on. Before I open up to all councillors, but.
So can you just clarify that? We base it on,
The 850, which is the Māori electorate population.
and how's that figure gained?
That is gained through a calculation, so it looks at those of 90% who choose to be on the Māori electoral roll. It's not one of 90% chooses to be on the some choose on the general electoral roll, and then it takes that proportion and it builds in those also who are not enrolled to vote, so those under 10, for example.
But that's a requirement.
Yeah,
It's not a discretion.
It just seems very loose and very unscientific, actually.
Standard that's used by the council. So I'm just going to pass this on. So the 434 is not, that is an actual in the last general election.
Make one correction before everybody has their say. Under 2.5, we talk about 32 councils that the opportunity provided by the changes to the LEA to establish Māori wards for the 2002 elections. I think it's meant to be for 2022.
Yeah. I did know that.
I saw that too.
So, but anyway, I'm going to pass this over. I just want to get comment on the standing committee on the report. And your thoughts.
Well, I guess things that we as a committee, we haven't had a chance to get together on this either. This was in between meetings, so we don't meet again until the 8th of June, so not until next week. But in the meantime, what I've understood from pretty much most of our committee is we didn't have a really good understanding about wards to start with. Even 2 years ago, and I don't think the council at that time had a really good understanding of wards. So neither parties were really ready for the work as it was. And I know, from our committee 2 years ago, we definitely couldn't have managed it. We were quite broken at that point. We just had a change of chair, and the committee was very, we didn't have all our members on. We've only just got Papawai on, we've only just got Hauriki on. These things have taken time. We've got our Kahununu rep, Rangitane are there sometimes. So, but we're just about nearly there as a committee and making really good joint decisions. But see, the thing about the ward, it's just going to require a lot more work. I mean, for me, I need to get some advice from people that I know that have gone through the process, and I'll be reaching out to those people. 2 committee members have already said, is this the best structure? Is Māori wards the best way forward for Māori in South Wairarapa? Will that give Māori voting rights, fair voting rights? Will it give better representation for Hapu and Marae? That's the question that we will probably discuss at our next meeting, because that's not the only way to get representation. It's not the only way to make sure that our voice is heard, that we have a voting right going forward. It's, this committee right now are committed to creating a bicultural organisation with council. So I think there's good things to happen. And if anything, we want to, as Andrea says, got to find the positive opportunities out of things that happen. And we think, well, actually, it's brought it to the foreground, and it has made us look at it and go, is it actually the best thing for us? Is it going to give us the fairest representation, voting rights as we want to see for Māori in South Wairarapa? Is it going to create the bicultural organisation we want to achieve?
Councillor Maynard.
One of the things that I'm quite interested in, because one of the things that I still don't understand, and that's not really in this report. So either Steph or Karen, if either of you guys could answer this, is if Māori on the electoral roll were given the opportunity to vote for a Māori ward representative, would they still be able to vote at large? So would they still be able to vote for the others that are standing within the ward that they live in? So in effect, at the moment, anyone who is Māori, whether or not they're on the Māori electoral roll or not, have 3 votes.
In their ward.
That's right. Yes. And so this would mean that Māori would become, again, a little bit more disenfranchised. Is that something that could be looked at within, is that actually a local government law? Is that something that it has to, so that's set in stone, or is it something that each council can decide on?
It's
because
it's set in law.
It is.
The government we would want to advise.
Yeah.
Through LGNZ, once we've had a representation or
I just think this is something really that needs to be thought about and to also be on the table for people looking.
If the government to consider the ability for a different
Because,
way.
like I say, at the moment, anyone that's, within our district and within each ward can vote for for 3 people to represent them.
It's actually 4 because even.
And 1 at large.
And me.
Yeah.
So you also get.
To me, that just doesn't.
Yeah, this is all part of our government review.
So.
You'll
But
notice if you've been watching some of the commentary around this, actually Kaikoura, Kaikoura gentleman, exactly that issue. So I suspect, given the intent of the government to try and resolve this so it's fair and to make sure that we do have good moral representation, there will be a number of councils that will be asking, is the legislative framework correct in a number of other areas? And I can't say that can guarantee that's going to happen, but that there are things in the legislation just you raised that actually march it.
And I also looked at, the other thing is as well, and that's something else that could be looked at while we go through this process, is what has been put in place with Carterton District Council, so our neighbours, who have been able to work with their hapu, and so all of these things that can be looked at through a Māori lens. I think it's very important.
Right, but don't also forget that we have got the review of local government occurring at the moment. And they will come to our Māori Standing Committee, and that is a perfect opportunity to express these concerns for an overarching change in councils. Yeah.
Just the comments that have made of supporting what the reader is saying is this best for Māori in our area. And at the moment, we've got and we're probably the envy of a lot of councils, we've got a very strong Māori Standing Committee that's actually making traction now. That's making traction and supporting hapu, marae and iwi. I would hate to see this, put that on back burner.
Well, it shouldn't, because they're 2
I know
separate
it
things.
shouldn't, but I would hate to see it happen. So, I totally support the concept of the Maori water, but it's got to be done in the right way.
Councillor Brennan.
Yeah, look, I just want to commend you, Nerida, because I remember you just started in the chair when we had the conversation, we were in the other room, and you reinforced exactly what you said then today about building up the capability of the Māori Standing Committee must be the focus. And look, I commend you and your committee for the way that it is growing in stature and growing in importance, and I think that's where we should be putting our efforts at the moment. I think the Maori ward thing, for all these other reasons that we've talked about, may not be the best solution, but again, that's up to you guys to decide. But I think if we rush this, we will make a mistake, and Maori will carry that mistake. And that's the problem. And so I think we need to reinforce and put more effort into encouraging the Maori Standing Committee to build up this. There is no rush for this. It's actually a decision made in haste is often a bad decision. And so we are better off to put our efforts into supporting the Maori Standing Committee until you are ready to come to us and say, this is how we look at this. Otherwise, it's supposed
the participation in government review is a major part. But if I could take this opportunity to express my thanks for the way the Māori Standing Committee is stretching its capability and the way it's operating. It's fantastic. Thank you. Right. Are there any more questions?
I've got a question for you both in the reader. So just thinking if we did adopt, and that was one person in the future, so how, so following on from what you were saying, how confident could you feel that that one person represented all of the views, and would that be a major stumbling block in your view?
I just take the other thing with so whoever is representing the Māori ward is also so they're representing the district, but they actually vote on everything. So it's you know, they are put in a position where they may not be able to have that, you know, this is where you always have your opportunity you need to have your Māori Standing Committee or your iwi representatives or whatever it looks like to actually be able to help you make those decisions, because you need the people. It comes up, not down, you know, and so that's I think that's really, really important. And so to me, I don't think I couldn't honestly and in all fairness say and answer that question honestly and openly until we actually start moving with the review to see what we look, you know, what it looks like.
And that role for that individual, for this whole district, it has to be a fully paid role. You cannot, you know, try and hold, you know, like I do, running around. I mean, I've been at work this morning, done deliveries this morning, raced in here, but to get that there, you know, it has to be a fully recognised role, a paid role for someone to do that, because then they have to start communicating with the committee and, you know, and keep their lines open with Marae and Hapu, and they're huge roles. I mean, as the legislation sits at the moment, the board is not going to support that individual. It's another flaw in the structure.
Yeah, and I think that would come out of the government, the local government review as well, and raised through that with regards to remuneration. I think remuneration is a real issue everywhere.
But then, yeah, some have managed to do it. They're like Wellington have got two sit on there that are paid full wage. I think they've done it in the country, but you know, bigger councils, huge.
200,000 people as well. Just a last one, Karen.
Very quickly, I endorse everything else has said, and as a member of the committee, very pleased we got this. Quick question: the timeline set here, have you got time to do it, to get the workshops organised before the end of the year and report back to her? No. I'm just saying it seems very tight to me. Very tight to me.
You know what I mean? You know, in reality, in real world, real time, that's hard.
I know.
A committee that.
Well, let's move it now so we get a realistic date, and Karen can, you know, that's all.
Could I put another comment in there? Maybe that's one opportunity, but maybe there's more opportunity for another folk on board to help provide the resources that Māori Standing Committee needs, because I think there's also a need to try and follow a timeline and probably a need to also try and meet targets for the representation review. And if Narita's already saying not a chance, then we need to be able to react.
This will be tabled at the Māori Standing Committee, and we can certainly receive comment and just record it.
When it's the meeting
next week. Next week.
Right, guys. So if we wrap that up, do we have a mover to note the information provided on recent amendments to the Local Government Act 2001 regarding the establishment of Māori boards, and also provide proposed approach to community engagement ahead of a representation review for the 2025. Thank you, Councillor West. Secondly, Councillor Eames. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against. The motion is carried. Thank you, everyone, for a good discussion. We're now considering, do we want a break now? Or do we want to-
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. So we're now going on to the action items report D1. We all back. Wait for Siri to run this report. So do we have a mover to receive the report? Thank you very much. Lee, seconded. Councillor Eames. Looking for you, Pam, but we didn't really. Pam's complaint. All those in favour, please say aye. All those against, the motion is carried. So now, councillors, do we have any questions you want to ask of us? Porcelain.
This is not a question, it's just a comment on item number 87. So I consulted with the mayor and with the chair of the Cobblestones board, and we have a potential candidate for the new position to represent us on Cobblestones. I had hoped to have an answer by Monday. It looks like it might be later this week, but I hope to have it hopefully resolved.
So that will hold over to the next council meeting unless you'd like to have a resolution that I can appoint. But I'd rather just leave it. I don't think there's anything massively pressing on that one. Okay. Any other comments?
Are we getting many Lagoima requests?
Yes, quite a few. There are
slowed down a little.
Yeah, actually, we had a space as you associated with the long-term plan. So yes, there's been quite a number that have been generated by information from the long-term plan.
But is it in general, you know, certain key members of the public we haven't seen for a little while, and I just wonder whether.
I think there are still key people that have probably generated the majority of the work. But I think the sign of a healthy council is to have requests and clarification. You know, the idea would be that if there is a request that we advertise it to stop other requests on the same issue. You know, clarifications on the same issue.
Can I just ask a question of you, Harry? Is there been given any thought to have on the website current questions under Lagoina?
Yeah, yes, definitely. Yeah. Karen can comment on that. Karen, the question?
Yes, we're currently we're currently considering that as part of our Lagoima process, which we're working through at the moment, and the issue of proactive release. So when we've responded to a request and then putting that full response, if it's a matter of public interest, out onto our website. So yeah, we're working through that process at the moment.
So I mean, the basic rule of thumb is not just any request, it's something that can require us to identify the person. That things we think genuinely the public would be interested in, and that's a general question and response.
As opposed to saying the rating on a particular property. Sorry, Rebecca.
Just a question in regard to Tararua Junction. How far are we away from that road being gazetted?
Hopefully, so I signed the statutory declaration last week.
Okay.
So the process that we followed was we had to provide evidence to the Secretary of Transport, Ministry of Transport, say it looks, smells and tastes like a road. So we had to put up evidence of its use as a road, and I had to sign a statutory declaration to that effect. That has been signed and been forwarded. So we gave an original draft to the Ministry of Transport, and they came back and said, we think this is okay. So we've now done the formal side of that. It's all signed and gone back. So we're just waiting for it to occur. So the drop dead date from the development perspective is the developer needs to have that decision in July. And the reason for that is it means because it's formally a road, then they can apply for an easement for the services to open up stage 2.
Right.
Okay. So in the end, it really helps to know the lawyers who are Ministry of Transport very well.
Very helpful.
Document.
It's something that might make things go very a lot faster.
So Harry, I'm really interested by this. It's something that really quite interested in, I suppose. That how do you define a road?
So
in your statutory declaration?
Well, we had to prove evidence like we set speed limits, that we were maintaining it. So it's the evidence that we were treating it as literally that it looks, acts and is performing the function of a road. And that's what we're saying in statutory correction. Yeah, as I said, you have to say it looks.
And you're telling me there's somebody in Wellington now that reviews that decision of yours.
Yep.
Excellent. Please.
Yep.
Keeps them all employed.
Yeah.
Good God. Totally.
Yeah, Councilman.
And with regards to 739, how long do they have to, the council decision was presented to owner for consideration with regards to the road reserves? And I'm just wondering, how long would they normally have to get back? Because not having anything yet, so, and that's still to be open, I'm just wondering.
Is that only since February though, wasn't it?
So on the 31st of March it was presented, so I'm just wondering, it's been a couple of months, how long do they normally have, 60 days or?
So, you can wait, stop. I think it's all protection of road.
Sorry, that's the stop on the paper road.
739.
Where there was an olive grove in the building on the paper road.
Oh, well, look, we have to come back. Yeah, I'm just not sure where it's at to in the process.
Anything to do with land takes time.
Okay.
Last time we were waiting.
Cool. Got any other questions on the action items? No. Right. Cool. We'll move now on to the most important, which is the mayor's report.
Can we discuss it?
Move not to accept.
Pretty clear what's going on there with regards to cobblestones. Wellington Water, I think you're all still aware what's going on there. Wellington Water is with a new chair and 2 new board members. One of them is Wairau based, Leanne Saudi. We are looking to position Wellington Water into a more, or do plans to make it more appropriate. If there is a local government reform, that it's not going to disappear totally, but we'll be able to keep some of the resources and talents in there. And that's a big challenge for them to do. I have attached as well the Waka Kotahi speed management plans, which is a positive, but we to be approached with caution with regards to retaining our
What's an RTC?
Regional Transport Committee.
That doesn't actually explain that in the document. I looked left, right, and centre in that document tonight. I know what an RCA is.
Yeah.
Not an RTC.
Cool. And the other one was the Pacifica phono, which you've heard Luther Fellow talk to. The phono itself was with regards to vaccination and for Pacifica and including Filipino. We have, through Sid, a communities officer, offered the option of hosting one in the South Wairarapa for all minorities. At the moment, he has felt that there's no need to do that, but he'll come back to us if he feels there may be a need for a vaccination education for the South Wairarapa. Just to know that there's stuff going on with that. We had our first meeting of the Wellington Region Leadership Committee to establish it, but the first full meeting will be occurring later on this month, where there will be iwi and as well 3 cabinet ministers to be announced, and the independent chair will be announced at that point. I don't know whether it was made public.
I'm not sure. So
it's running that. So there is also the request that with regards to remits for the local government conference, of which Garrick and Rebecca will be attending with me, and Harry and Karen. Just to be a request, I think there's it further on where I get the delegations to do that. And then there's my the inward correspondence, which I just thought I'd start throwing some extra stuff in there to show you what some of the odd pieces we get. Yeah, so are there any comments on the schedule or the meetings that happen?
Can I ask a couple of questions that will be pertinent to the meeting that Pam and I are going to tomorrow next day for the road speeds? They talk in this paper about schools. Now, there's central government going to do that, or is that going to be us doing that as a local?
It'll be us doing it in conjunction with.
Certainly in this report, they talk about they're going to do it. And in particular schools, so they have a chapter on schools here.
It will still come to us, but it would be unwise of us to challenge their recommendation on schools.
So they want a national approach to all schools, basically, in New Zealand. Makes sense.
So there's certainly no kickback about speed limit around schools that I've picked up with. And they're talking about doing it by 2024 or implementing by 2029. Why do we have to wait so long? Can we do it before that? And what would be the process that we can do?
I think that we as a council need to submit on this, as to what we think. I really do think we need what we support and what we don't support, and the reasons why we need to.
It'd be interesting to see, and you probably jump in here, I suppose. Do we need to have a consensus of opinion around the table what Pam and I take to this committee? And therefore, do we need a report on what the officers are thinking about what we should do with our roads and so on? Because obviously Pam and I going there, taking our views, but that may not necessarily be representative of everybody's views.
A lot of it is legislative as opposed to opinions when it comes to this, but I suggest that possibly you ask Harry and Karen for a report. You have a report to go forward.
Yeah, so there's two different things at play. This paper is about setting, if you like, the regulatory framework for setting speed limits. Okay, so this is which is different to the work that the committee is doing, which is what are the appropriate speed limits we should be consulting with our community on, right? So this paper stands aside that discussion to a degree. Okay, so for example, take an example around schools. The fundamental difference is there are some schools in urban areas and some that are on rural roads. So if you put in, say, a blanket 30k around every school, that would not be appropriate on a rural school that's on a collector road, for instance, where the speeds maybe, where you want the traffic to come right off the road and not be anywhere near the school. So there is a mix of rules that need to apply in different situations. But to answer your question, the answer is yes, absolutely should be talking about what our local road should look like in conjunction with this rule.
So will you present something to the council at the next meeting so that Pam and I have got some guidance from the council to take forward? Or
and we've also had a talk, we're going to have a talk with you, and just so that we can get the officers' perspective for the meeting we've got on Friday.
We're also inviting Steve James, who's the Wakatane safety advisor, road safety advisor, to come attend the Assets and Services committee, so he can answer a number of questions around what they're doing on state highway 2, which we just join all the dots and some of these things as well.
Well, it's probably more appropriate now that we've had the initial discussion about rural roads here or middle roads here in speed, that we actually have a consistent message that we can take to Carterton and say, this is what we are going to do. We would like you to come on board with us.
I think too that the consultation, we need to be very careful, is that the consultation going out to the public is going to be time for this going out to the public for consultation as well. So we're going to have two things with roading to look at the same time, which is will either complement each other or it's going to confuse the whole issue. So yeah.
For the next assets and services meeting, could we have your views on that? To us. So if we've got these people from NCTA here, we can, as Harry said, it's the time to get them across. And so I don't know whether Pam and Alice, you'll be able to do a bit of summary on what's discussed.
Yeah. We're not getting minutes from the meeting now, are we?
No, but I think there's enough notes between you and I.
It's big on what goes on there as well. We can possibly probably call on to the Rimataka Road Committee. That's the one. Which discusses all the roads from say Highway 58 through to Marston, and bring that into that conversation as well.
And when's that?
I'm not sure the time.
We sent it like,
we just have to watch because this is going out on the 25th of June, so our timeline is very, very tight, isn't it? Yeah.
So just to be clear, the paper in front of you is the national consultation form of the new regulation to manage speed across New Zealand.
And it also
As it goes to the parliamentary.
But in it, they are talking some specific speeds, particularly schools, so we need to make sure that we're not going against what they're thinking.
All right, the other one is that I mentioned the Wellington Regional Leadership Joint Committee. We do need an alternate. I'm suggesting that the deputy mayor sits with that. Everyone's comfortable with that.
Don't know, how do you feel?
Because we've got to make them work for a salary.
Yeah, how do you feel about
I had a
that?
photo of the mayor doing nothing at the last one.
So moving straight. So if we could have someone move that we received a report from myself and to appoint the deputy mayor as an alternate to be a member of the Wellington Regional Leadership Joint Committee to attend meetings in exceptional circumstances where the mayor is unable to attend. So I move that. Councillor Maynard, seconded Councillor Colenso. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, motion is carried. And now we can now go to the one. We welcome Dame Margaret Baisley, Jeff Henley and others who will be giving a presentation on the draft Wairarapa water resilience strategy. Welcome, Jeff. Welcome, Dame Margaret. Welcome, Margaret. None of us are very early for this. Yes, thanks, Dan. So thank you very much.
Dame Margaret and Jeff. Good morning to the council of South Wairarapa. It is my pleasure to introduce Dame Margaret, who needs no introduction, and Jeff Henley. I'm Madam Matuta. I'm a member of the Kahungunu PSG. That's the Citizen Trust. I acknowledge Marina, who's a member of the Water Strategy Committee, representing Kahungunu. That's it, worship councillors. It's a great pleasure to be here and to actually come with the finished strategy. The background to the strategy is that it was foreshadowed in the economic development strategy, and it builds on and is a continuum of the Whaitua report. Water resilience strategy grew out of the user group of farmers, councillors, farmers, councils, and business people. It was joined by the mayors and the Greater Wellington Regional Chair and iwi leaders of Rangatani Settlement Trust. We're later joined by environmental interests and the chair of Whaitua. We grew into a large group representing many interests, and we were funded by the Regional Growth Fund. The report identifies climate change as the major threat to our way of life, our prosperity and well-being, and the attractiveness of the Wairarapa region. It will affect everyone. The Whaitua recommendations regarding mana whenua participation in the management of water recognises the unique relationship Maori have with water and recommends their influence be established in management, decision-making and governance in Wairema. And we have picked up on that. And we're certainly grateful, very grateful to the joint iwi to iwi Settlement Trust for their joint statement report and the various clarifications throughout the So the strategy provides a whole of community approach that everyone can and will contribute to in the years ahead. And as I mentioned at the beginning, it's really work in progress. It's a continuum on the tour, and no doubt there will be other iterations in the years ahead. But right now, I think we're one of the few parts of the country that actually have one resilient strategy. So I'll hand over to Jeff to give you the detail of it.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you, and I just do want to acknowledge the contribution that you, Alex, and Carrie both made actively on the group and the contribution of the council to the exercise. The combination of the 4 councils, the regional council and the 3 local councils, was a major factor in doing that, and I just want you to know and understand that people worked hard on your behalf with regard to this. I was just reflecting on Dame Margaret's comment that we bring a finished strategy, and that's true. But it's sort of like the never-ending story. You know, it's as much the beginning as it is the end, because climate change is not a it's not a 5-year issue. It's not a 10-year issue. It's not a 20-year issue. It's a 100-year issue, and so we have to be able to respond to that. But if I could just take you through that, I'll have a beautiful picture of the lake with glistening waters. This was a joint statement, which I won't read the whole thing to you, but we wanted to put it up there just so as you knew, just about reference it from the 2 settlement trusts. But there's 1 or 2 ideas in it that are absolutely fundamental to this, and the first one is in the first sentence. Water is the blood of the earth mother, Papa Tunuku, and the rivers are her veins. It's a really nice idea, and what it says is that she will be healthy if the water is flowing through her veins, and if the water is not flowing through her veins, she won't be healthy, and that we have to keep that going. So it is her who has given us life from time immemorial, and it is her that solutions to climate change lie. All things animate and inanimate have Maori. Maori is an inanimate life force that requires balance. And that really captures where the strategy starts, which simply says we are here because of the environment in which we live. We will be here in the future because of the environment that we live in. But the environment that we live in is under threat due to a number of things, mainly climate change. And we have a responsibility to try and restore its capability to do the job it has done for many years. And that's a complex issue and requires a lot of thinking about. So I won't go through the rest of the statement, except to say that it also reflects the fact that we are looking to a partnership with Maori. We're talking using language like co-governance in terms of the future of this type of program, because it needs that commitment to working together. So it's been a really good statement to set us off in the right direction. So we picked that out really as being our vision statement: a spring of water from the heart of Papatunuku, an eternal spring of water, unfailing. An eternal spring supports life, an eternal spring supports longevity, an eternal spring supports eternal well-being. And there is a translated version. And well, this is the translated version. The Maori version is in the report.
just a quick background that Dame Margaret mentioned as to where this came from. I won't bore you with all of that, but just to let you know that it's got a bit of form. There was the NIWA climate change report in 2017, which we've drawn on heavily. Then there was the Whaitua, there was the Economic Development Strategy, the Wairarapa Water Users Group, which is a group, a mixed group, and a lot of farmers were part of the genesis of it. The Provincial Growth Fund threw in some money. The group was formed in late 2009, early 20. We commenced at the beginning of last year. The full draft, the first full draft was completed in December of last year. I often say to my staff, when you finish your first draft, you're only halfway there. And that's why it's Jan now, because there is so much working through that needs to be done. Don't want to dramatise, but it's important that we understand what the threat is to the eternal spring of water. This is mainly drawn from NIWA. So the water deficit, or the shock of climate change, will produce a water deficit of probably around 15% by mid-century, mainly lost from evaporation. And through most of the year, that's not a big issue. But from the period from December to March, or January to March, it's a big issue and a getting bigger issue. Low flows, such as established through the Whaitua, will mean that more water has to go to supporting Papatūmuku. Therefore, that's water not available for other things. It's just a fact of life that we have to do, but that's what it means in practice. Economic and population growth is going to require more water. The region has quite a modest population projections, and until just recently, I was a little bit critical of those, thinking this area is going to grow faster than that, until I saw some of the latest demographics, which now slid beneath its replacement rate of population growth. So what the future will be is very interesting. The loss of the Maori of the water, more water is required to keep the environment, because it's not just the farms that dry out, or not just the towns that dry out, it's the environment itself that dries out, and we have to protect it. And infrastructure challenges, which you and the other councils face, you've got a lot of money you're having to set aside for other things besides these considerations. It could add up to around 40 to 50% a need for more, 40 to 50% more available water by mid-century in the water deficit period, if we were to stay the same. That's not, of course, saying that we would stay the same, but if we would, that's what it would mean. And when you look at it like that and say, that is a big shock. It's a big shock on a community and a way of life and an economy and all of those things. I don't want to dramatise it, but there is as it were, a burning platform for this. But what are our goals? We can't move that little picture there, can we?
We might be able to drag it to the bottom.
For me, just in case just put it down on the bottom corner. Oh, yeah. We don't want to pretend that it's not there. So, our goals to protect Papatūmuku, because without her, we have nothing. We don't have the environment that is fundamental to our way of life. And to protect ourselves, our communities, and our livelihoods, because without them, we are nothing. And perhaps there should be another point that says, and not to put those two things into conflict with each other. Because when you do, that's when the arguments start. But finding the ways where there is a win-win between those two things. The iwi position, which we talked about a bit before, which some principles we highlighted, they are looking for, they've said to us, a solution focus. that all the solutions are in play, but for their particular function. A focus on memorial of water, nature-based green solutions being favouring that where everything else is equal. A transformational approach where we need to do that, so not tinkering with it, taking it head on. Experimental and collaborative. You know, these solutions in here are freely safe. I don't even know if they'll work, but someone has got to work on them to see how they might work. And to influence, to be part of decision making, not just through advisory, but in the driver's seat in a co-governance type of situation. But there's also our mindset, and getting ourselves in the right mindset. Firstly, it's the scale. The impact is large. And, you know, it's that old problem, if it's this big and we undershoot down here, we simply will not solve the problem, we'll not address it, and we'll fall ourselves in the process. And the difficulty with climate change is the more you don't address it, the bigger the problem becomes. So getting the scaling of it right. The impacts may be over 100 years. Just think about it for a second. Let's say Paris works, and we do get to zero carbon by 2060. I mean, the Chinese aren't at zero until 2060, but there'll be another 20 or 30 years of lag after that because we're in the pre-lag period now. So it's a 100-year issue. The unknown, there's likely to be more that we don't know than what we do know. And so we can't, as it were, close out on options that might prove actually to be worthwhile at a later date, for example. It's invisible. The doubters will have a plausible case. You can't easily see it, touch it, feel it. And so is it really there? Or is it really going to be that bad? I've been hearing people lately in response to this saying that I'm exaggerating, or we're exaggerating the threat. I don't think so. The priority, other things will appear more important in the moment. You know, if you were living in Ashburton at the moment, climate change would not be the first thing that's on your mind. It would be, certainly not the drought of it. Complexity, the complexity is high, and the complexity doesn't just come from the technical issues of it, it comes from the fairness and equity issues. Like, if I'm going to give something up, what about them over there, or them over there, or them over there? I've already given stuff up in the past. It's the same issue between the developed nations and the undeveloped nations. You know, you guys put all that stuff up there. Why the hell should we have to suffer? These are similar questions. And working with iwi as partners in the management of water. So, what do we mean by resilience? Just a quick way to think about it. You can think of it at different levels. For some, resilience is if we could just do things and just bounce back to normal. You know, if we could do a bit of this and a bit of that, and we'll be back. Well, there are some strategies that can do that. Generally, they are of a smaller scale. We can sort of absorb it and be able to live with it. So make a few changes here and there, but overall we can absorb it. Then there's adaptation. No, there's actually some fundamental things we've got to change. Land use patterns, water use patterns, that sort of thing. Like, for example, as the report tells you, Wairarapa is a very high per capita user of water, least user of water, and you know what, mostly. But you're substantially higher by way of a comparison. And the last area is transformation. There are some things that we will simply need to do things completely different. And we might be growing things, we might run our economy differently. The focus of our lives may change. The design of our communities may change over a long period of time. I mean, these are fundamental things that we have to think about. So the essence of the strategy is, though, quite simple. It's temper demand, try and pull our demand back to what we really need to do, and enhance supply. And in tempering demand, it's doing more with less, and that has to be a key thing. It's amazing how, when you put in water meters, how people do more with less. That is possible. Encouraging less water intensive land uses, putting amenable land uses into the shoulder seasons, for example, encouraging greater efficiency. You can see the sorts of things there, whereas in supply, it's sequestering water by directing it to and retaining it in the ecosystem as a whole, augmenting groundwater, surface water, lakes, wetlands. Just the act of holding water in the environment is a form of storing and wetting the environment. You hold it in soil, you hold it in trees and in grass and all sorts of things like that. All these things need to be thought about. And there's this sort of strategy versus tactics thing. There's an overarching strategy is tempering demand and enhancing supply. That's what I said on the last slide. But our tactical focus is particularly targeting demand in the water deficit period, because that is our immediate area of concern. If we can move some land uses out of January, February into November, December, or later in the year, those types of things. If we can, many of your events, for example, in the region, take place in January, February, and early March. So you have an enormous, your peak of water use goes up enormously. Can we flatten that out a bit? You know, these are, you don't have to do it tomorrow. These are things that can happen over time. There are also green and grey type of approaches, which we talked about before. Green being the environmental ones, grey being the built ones. You can see the types of solutions there that we identified, from riparian planting at the green end right through to urban and rural use efficiency, managed equal for recharge, bulk storage, rainwater harvesting, more at the grey end. Just by way of illustration, the United Nations report says that across the world, 98% of the solutions at the moment are in the grey area. You know, sad, but that's 2% are at the green end, but the green end is growing far faster than the grey end is. So there's a change of attitude taking place. So we sort of tried to put all of this together, and I won't dwell on it, but we've got green at one end, which is whole of catchment type of things. On the grey side, there's more infrastructure. It tends to be more localised. Then remember that earlier diagram which had the adaptive, transformative. We've just tried to place on that where these solutions apply. And the conclusion of the group was very much all of these are in play to play a particular role. Now, what is their role? And how do we balance all of those things together? That was the exercise, the results of the exercise that we did. And you can see that we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 along the bottom groups that we did a prioritising exercise with on each of those ones. Interestingly, groundwater, augmentation, reuse and water use efficiency scored lower, which the efficiency one really quite surprised me, but you know. Storage, natural attenuation, managed retention and land use action scored higher, but all of them score in the zone of they're all in play. And that was our main outtake from it. So the greatest challenge is not science, although it's important, and our ability to build our defences, although those are important. It's being smart and innovative about how we go about this. And the greatest challenge is the people challenge, actually. It's not the scientific and technical challenge. It's dealing with doubt, denial, fear, rigidity, uncertainty, complexity. To put it in a word, it's a leadership challenge. And so much of the strategy actually focuses on leadership. And on just the last couple of slides, I'm just going to deal with that a little bit. So what we wanted to do was to try and form a basis on which this could be taken forward. And we came up with these, what we call the 4 rooms. Why rooms? It's getting this idea that there's a conversation that takes place in each of these areas of the people involved, and whilst strategy is the basis for this, they actually have to take it forward in that conversation and resolve, debate and resolve the issues. So the rooms: capture, which is capturing water; attenuation, which is holding water in the environment; allocation, which is who gets what; when a resource gets limited, then it's a question of who's high priority in resolving those issues. In adaptation, which is land use adaptation, based on a common platform, take that further through. This is sort of the distribution that we're looking at. Who would be involved? There'd be a wider committee associated perhaps with the Greater Wellington Regional Council Committee, but probably an entity in its own right with a co-management structure around it with iwi, that the various affected parties would be in each of those rooms working on development, using the strategy as the base to build up, setting priorities, identifying further directions. Scheduling, just a quick look. So we've got some early stuff to do. We've got some setup stuff to do. We need to get a stronger water balance, which is that sort of booming platform I talked about at the beginning, which was a little bit rough and ready. Bruce from the Greater Wellington is here. He's been the champion of the aerial survey, the SkyTeam survey, which is going to look at groundwater, because groundwater is one of the big unknowns. A lot of our thinking is based around getting more water into groundwater. We don't actually know where it goes. And so getting to the bottom and understanding that is really important. Then implementation of the various initiatives over a period out to 10 years, with an objective of getting the whole program up and going and moving forward within 10 years. So we're not saying completely 10 years, we're saying getting it going, getting it on the road in a sustainable, fundable form. That will then give us the basis to go forward, because we have a slight window. We have a window that you guys are achieving with greater efficiency in the use of water. So that's a good thing. Quite a few of not only the councils, but quite a few of the other water users still have some room in their consents to expand a bit. So we do have a window to do some of that development, as long as we are focused on making sure that as that window diminishes, that we are starting to hold it open through our activities. So just quickly to finish, next steps, commitment and principle is what we're looking for, to gain commitment from key organisations, to create the leadership entity. We talked about leadership being the key thing. Schedule a work program and mount a number of the key support projects, such as the SkyTeam, such as the water balance, and so on. So maybe I'll leave it on that slide. Where else? That's it in
just managed to abbreviate 2 years' work. 9 slides. That's pretty impressive. Councillors, have you got any questions of panel here today?
Actually, I'd go to say you've abbreviated 7 years of work, including 5 years of tour work.
We stand on the shoulders of others. Excellent.
I'm really pleased. I'm a was a FITOR member, so it's extremely exciting for me to see the next phase of what was some really important work that I think started a conversation within communities that is actually some real innovative thinking to take place. I'm really excited to see this. I do have one question though. I might not have been listening well enough, but I'm just really interested on your second to last slide in regard to scheduling, how you have put storage down across the next 2 to 10 years. And I'm really interested to explore with you just briefly the concept of storage, because it means so many different things.
Sure. Look, I'll just give you a quick thing. Firstly, there are different types of storage. You can have a tank in the backyard, like many of us do, who are not on council supply, or at that level, collecting rainwater from the roof and so on. You can have ponds on farms, as many farmers do, some of which also double as wetlands and so on. Or you can have many variations of a tree, or you can have what we call constructed storage, which is a major storage like is proposed by Water Limited, whichever it is. So there are many different levels. That's what we refer to as storage. Water stored in lakes and rivers and stuff, we tend to refer to as attenuated or retained because it's in the environment. That's the first point I make. The second point I would make is that with regard to the constructed fee for storage, what we've said in there is, what I said before, all solutions are on the table, so it's on the table. What we've also acknowledged is that it's going through a process at the moment. We're not part of that process, and so we are deferring to it passing through that process. But what we have done in the strategy is we set out, I think it's about 6 or 8 principles in there about how and when you might apply a storage model. And they're quite tight. But they're designed to make sure that we don't go, oh, solution to all of this is storage, which not many people think that way anymore, but it's trying to get some balance into the discussion. The whole thing rests on the premise that if a natural solution, everything else being equal, a natural solution would be favoured over a constructive solution if all factors were equal. Of course, they really are all equal, but you know what I mean. It's in favour of Tanuku type solutions than human construction solutions. But actually, we've done so much, use the word, damage to our environment, that we actually have to undamage it by taking actions ourselves. We can't just say on nature, we've stuffed up your turn. It doesn't work like that anymore.
Remodify the modified environment to reflect more of what it was.
That's right, that's right. Puts us in a huge position of responsibility. Frighteningly so.
Hey, I've skimmed over the 250 pages and I really focused in on the solutions part. And I found it really interesting that one of the things that came up here was central pivots and the technology that's available to control the amount of water. And I found it really interesting that there's one farmer who can already save 20% of his water allocation. And my question is, we don't control water allocation, the regional council does that. Are they on board with this? And are they already going down the line of when farmers are renewing their consents, saying, actually, we're going to up your consent and say, you're going to have to use this technology because we're going to purely reduce your take away 20%, for example. Is that a solution that has been implemented now? And if not, why not?
I'm going to answer one little bit of that, then I'm going to bounce it to Bruce. Is that right? Yep. So but just at the front end of that, I want to name that farmer because I think he's a hero. And it's Mark Gaspard, and he's in your area. And I asked him, why does he do it? And he said to me, well, I thought about it, I reckoned I could do it, so I did.
He's very deep. He's very deep about that.
Probably saves some cost as well, and electricity as well.
It also cost him a fair bit to do it. But I just thought it was so refreshing, the attitude he has. But to Bruce for a second, yes, that issue is key to the regional council's considerations, and the allocation room that we talked about there is focusing directly onto that issue. Bruce.
Thanks, Jim. Exactly what you described is exactly what happens already in terms of consent. So every time a consent is reviewed, assuming it's an existing one, then they look at the land use that is being applied to and what should be the use of water on there. You can imagine historically some people have got this much water allocated to them, but they only need that much for growing lettuces or whatever it is. So the whole, basically a very slow but progressive rationalisation of water and water consenting, and applies to councils and Bastard in particular. It's got a huge quantity of water allocated to it, but it doesn't actually use that amount of water. So that's a whole process that's undergoing. It's also consistent with what said as well. So it's
very much part of the package that was recommended there. And the same applies to water storage that we were talking about in the previous question as well. It's dead on consistent what we've got in the water strategies. So if you follow on logically from that, if we're going to make these changes to rural, which are very heavy users, does that not then bring into question the validity of the water storage solution that Wellington Water are doing? You know, if you save 20% of water already flowing down our rivers and through our waterways, do you need to then build a storage facility if we've already saved that 20%? Because I'm imagining to save 20% of water will be far bigger than that dam could ever hold anyway.
Yeah, I think the other important thing is the difference between what is consented and what is actually used. It's massive. It's in the order of 60 to 70% on average.
On which side?
On average, which side? About 60 to 70% of the water is actually used on an average year, and I mean an average summer. Focusing on the summer. This season was a very average summer. We know all the records for the various. Obviously, Ashburton's sort of exceeded that. So when you look at that, and then the other thing that was very interesting when you go down to the next level of detail is how is water being. So if you've got this much water being allocated over a certain subcatchment, let's say, how that water is actually used over any particular day. So if you just go to the 2nd of January and see how many resource consent users are actually using water. Not all of them by any means use their resource consent take or up 80% or more of their resource consent take on any one day. There's a huge spread of water being used over the course of a summer. So in other words, it's the availability / reliability of water that's really important to farmers, so they know what they've got. The other comment is one along. I was thinking while Jeff was talking with the Ashburton situation, I know it's an extreme, it's a 100-year event. Actually, what happened to Ashburton and it could have happened in Hawke's Bay, because they have just gone through a drought, is climate change. One of the big things with climate change is the extremes that we are going to find. So over a year, you might just get, roughly Wairarapa gets about the same amount of rain with climate change, but it's the extremes that we're going to go through. And what happened to Ashburton? They went through a massive drought. Guess what? Bang! It came down. That could have happened here or up north. So it's the fluctuation be able to cope with in the strategy.
Just before you leave the regional council, could I just mention, Worship, that we're presenting this to the 3 councils, of which you're the third one we've presented the report to. And later on, in a couple of weeks, we presented to the regional council with the expectation that they would adopt it. Now, this is, and they are the body that will, through that Wairarapa committee, that will oversee its implementation. But this is very much your report. Your councils have put enormous effort into this. And I think it really, council should look at how they're going to make sure that this is implemented in the Wairarapa. You're going to hit that Wairarapa committee, but I think you need to think how you're going to hold the regional council to account, and particularly if you look back on the Whaitua and what happened, how you know better than I do how that has been implemented, but it stands out loud and clear at the moment that the restoration of the catchment is envisaged in the Whaitua. It's not being implemented as much as it should, and there's now a big bucket of money coming in from that. So again, it's really up to you people to keep an eye on what is going on here and make sure that your representatives on that Wairarapa committee are empowered to really stand up and fight for the Wairarapa if that becomes necessary. So that's my party.
Did you get that message? Pretty on board.
So just following on from the having a drought followed by an extreme weather event, that could be the Wairarapa. Does the strategy look at the effects of that? Does it factor that into the equation?
Yes, it does. I'll come at it in a slightly different direction if you don't mind. Because, I mean, what happened in Ashburton, we wouldn't wish on anyone, would we? I mean, it's an extreme event, highly destructive. But in any given year, you have, in your area here and the rest of the Wairarapa has, let's call them rainfall events. You have them in January, February and March. We're expecting that you'll probably have a few less, but not excessively less. And there might be just a little bit less rain in them than was before. But the problem is not so much the supply, it's the loss, it's the evaporation from because you're going to have these raging temperatures in the January, February, March period, you know, up to 40-degree days, which are going to just the water. But those events are a key source of water, because the rest of the water that comes in the other part of the year has flowed out to sea, it's gone. And the storage, even the scale of Wairarapa water, is tiny in terms of the scale that we're talking about here. So quite a few of the measures in here are about trying to use the word capture the water from those rainfall events. And I'll just give you an illustration because it's the easiest way to think about it. I hope you haven't got your ribbon managers on the room, but if we were to cut a gate into a stop bank, and during one of those events let a bit of water out into a prescribed flood area where it only sat for 2 or 3 days at the most and seeped away into groundwater, we would just have stored quite a large amount of water. Yep. Let's say that we put in, it's in here, detention bungs, which are, you know, sort of like mini little dammy things, you know, on or associated with little streams, so that the water comes, sits behind them for 2 or 3 days. The grass doesn't die or anything like that. The water's gone. Where's it gone? Into groundwater. So we are possibly building up the amount of water in groundwater. Problem is, there isn't a dam down under there that stops and holds it there and waits for us to use it. It's flowing through. So what we have to do is increase the amount of water that's in travel, and that we're absorbing it, we're using it to a degree as it goes through. You give it, it's quite a complex idea, but but you can only make this work at scale. You know, 50 bungs wouldn't be enough. 150 wouldn't be enough. But we're getting up to 500, it's maybe starting to have an effect, because we're still losing a lot of the water out of the system. So these are the things that we need to study more and understand more. And the experts can't say to us, you know, build 50 of those and you'll have this result. It just ain't that clear.
Yes, sorry.
And I was just wondering, with regards to the groundwater aerial survey, will that be, will that cover everywhere? So, like, will that be right around the South Wairarapa as well? I know that Martinborough has been talking about getting a survey and.
Bruce is the man. Bruce.
Oh, Bruce, make my day.
Okay, so that survey, the aerial part of it, was meant to happen last summer. Yes. Because we couldn't get the link with Australia due to COVID, despite the best trials and tribulations for the central government. We're lining it up again this summer, coming summer. So we're literally in the process of signing a contract. To answer your question, where's it going to fly? Basically, it will fly over the whole of the valley floor. So it won't fly over the lake as such, but it will fly all around the lake. And it will fly just beyond the seashore down at Lake Anoki. And then right up, so everywhere you consider flat, it'll be flying in there. So in all it flies, the helicopter will 5,883, I think it is, kilometres, line kilometres. So it literally just goes, it finds, depending on which way the rivers are flowing in a particular section of the valley, it will fly that way for 30 kilometres, go across 200 metres, fly back, go across 200 metres, fly back. So it gets a hole in every 11 metres, so it's flying at 100 metres above ground level, and the equipment will be about 50 metres above ground level, and we go beep, 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 beep. So that's basically what happens there. So, yeah, so then, but that will take probably about 2 years for that data to actually then be QA, QC'd, and processed. It's actually processed in Denmark, believe it or not, and then actually interpreted as to what it means. And the outcome of that will be a 3D map of underground geology, which will tell us where the pebbles and stones and the muds and everything else are. So in other words, we'll then be able to determine that where Lake Wairarapa water comes in and goes out, etc., etc. So yeah, so we're not water mining. It's really clear that we're not out there water mining, but it will help in the big picture understand how, for example, Martinborough could possibly look at future suppliers, given the issues as well as.
And it might help us with it might help us with the flow of ground that I was referring to before. Just the way of thinking about it, just think of an MRI. It's an MRI on a puppet.
Okay, Alistair?
So you talk about decompaction here as part of your of the ground, and to me that's very critical. And I'm really pleased you talk about earthworms here. And you know, people will laugh about it, but actually they are what decompact the ground. And we know for a fact that the phosphates and things, particularly the phosphates and the extra nitrogen we're putting on the soil from our fertilizers, are killing earthworms, and therefore you're getting ground compaction, which makes it worse and worse. So whilst this is really good, it's not, you've got to actually add the other things in here and say we need to look at alternative fertilizers that encourage the growth of earthworms and those sorts of things, because we know that earthworms put a huge amount of nitrogen back into the soil, and they will only put as much nitrogen into the soil as the soil can cope with, otherwise it will kill the worms. So if we don't get the balance right here, everything we're doing in the water, it won't make any difference, because it won't actually create the health in the soil that we need to do. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Absolutely. I think it's you're getting into the transformational department, and you're getting into the area that we've called land exchange. And decompaction is part of it. Compaction is a product of pastoral farming.
The problem we have, of course, is that farmers have shares in fertiliser companies, and therefore there is this economic bonding that goes. Jeffrey's shaking his head, but we know this. You know, but there are alternative fertilisers out there that are, and I'm not a greenie any. Well, I probably am the way I'm talking, but you know, there are better ways to do things that actually balance our soils and balance our productivity, and probably increase productivity by using nature rather than artificially doing.
That's happening now.
But not fast enough.
Good things take time.
But I think that we could get back to Margaret's point, which is you've got a plan, and from that you build a picture of what you want in Wairarapa. Then you use that as a basis to go and see the people who matter and ask them, how is this going to be done? Rather than sitting and waiting for them to tell you what they might do in the year 2008. You know, it puts you in a very strong position in terms of how you might go forward.
Well, let me remember with Mark doing that saving 20% of the water. And then you found out how to do it. As Alice said, what are we doing? But, you know, don't get it.
Is there any financial support for installation of any of these dams or bonds to go through? I mean, I've been spending some time with Kaiwaiwai, and they're being charged in excess of $8,000 for an RMA just to put in a bioreactor, which is madness. The bioreactor cost $6,000, the resource got $8,000. Can we do something about that? We encourage them, but as a landowner, it encouraged me to say, okay, I don't have to go and spend $8,000 on a resource consent to put in a
let me paint a scenario for you. Let's say that we thought this fund's idea was the bee's knees, and but we know that to do it, we've got to get it down in unit cost by volume, if you like. So we might look to put together, let's call it a deal that has a contribution from the landowners, a contribution from even the councils, a contribution from the regional council, a contribution from the Crown, on the basis that no one party can do it alone, because it will never happen, because you can't do it to scale. So that room that is responsible for that area would look at seeing if it's possible to put together a whole picture like that. Now, I personally think that a proposition like that is very saleable to a government of the future, because they are looking for stuff like that. They just invested 10 million in jobs for nature in this area not long ago, a year ago or something, something like that. $10 million going into bun development could probably get you quite a few buns if you guys were throwing something in, if the landowners were throwing something in, even if there was community action type things going on. So it's getting together and grossing the problem up so as there are all parties contributing. People are not in isolation, grinding away like a mark. There are brave souls out there, but we actually need to get a whole lot of people working together.
And a lot of these things are just ideas, that they don't have any scientific base. And before you start wholesale implementation, start funded. I think you'll find that if you start having community meetings, that there are some people who think that that's an idea that somewhere and that you should implement it straight away, but you need the scientific base before you.
And that's got a potential national benefit, not just a Waireka benefit. So you shouldn't be paying for all of that.
The clean streams are called riparian planting regimes. A number of regional councils subsidised from the investment fund and funded riparian planting, fencing, and that's been piecemeal. It's been done in the last 20 years.
There's a lot of science being done on earthworms and particularly from iwi and Rotorua, and they had scientists coming out from India. So at conferences up there a couple of years ago, or 7 or 8 years ago about it. So there's a lot of science up there. It's removing blinkers. I think it's probably the
yes. Compost bin owners know about the science.
Yeah, that's right.
But there's one other one, and I know I've asked a lot of questions, but one other is the grey water issue, and I find it really interesting that because it's quite topical here, people are talking about trying to capture their grey water to water their gardens, particularly in Greytown. It's a water use in Greytown is a big issue, and a lot of people want to do this. But I did find it really interesting about the build-up of contaminants and sort of, you want to sort of expand a bit on that?
Yeah, that's where we got that from is largely the experimentation with it on the Kapiti coast, where there is evidence of some build-up of contaminants in the soil, which over a long period of time could become an issue. And I think we were probably in the department of, let's not say groundwater isn't the right thing to do, but we do have other options that don't do that. And given that you've got manganese in particular in your groundwater and stuff, it's just bearing these things along. So we're not just stretching it off the list totally, but we're saying it's got a few problems with it potentially. Why put it at the top of the list just now?
I think we're going to wrap this up, otherwise we could spend all
10 questions.
Yes, right.
Just so you know, NIWA they're in the process of producing, and I just peer reviewed the report 2 weeks ago, climate change projections for the Waireka. So that at the moment, there's one for Coal Road that was listed up there as 2017. We've now gone down to another level. So there's one coming out, that'll be out by the end of the year, I think. the idea is to build in the latest IPCC projections that come out, and that'll obviously reflect back on New Zealand and reflect on Wairau. So that'll give us, that's down to another level of detail, which will help in the planning of what direction we take.
Thanks, Bruce. All right, thank you very much for your presentation, guys. It's not often you get applause from right, guys. We'll just quickly do this one last item before we break for lunch. We have a table report from Alan Bulk, our destination Wairau representative. Do we have a mover to receive the report? Councillor Best, seconded. Councillor Hay. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
All those against, please say no. The motion is carried. That's a pretty brief report. Do we have any comments from councillors?
This one.
I guess we're getting feedback.
Yeah, we are getting feeling. We'll note this is the first time we've had one of these. Which one is this?
This is the destination Wairau. One page. I think we've got an email about it.
Yeah, it's just a brief. Last meeting.
No, is that?
Right.
Got an email about it. Six months.
But after lunch, we'll be going to the public excluded for about 20 minutes before returning to the public section of the meeting to continue with with the LTP deliberations. So we will open the door once we've returned to the public, and using Suzanne's word, I think I could whip around. The waiting is here to see if anyone else is wanting to come back in for that. So I will break for lunch and we will come back at 20 past 1. Well, that's you, isn't it? Okay, we'll carry on without the deputy mayor. Right, so now we go back to the additional agenda item, which was, where was that exactly? To the long-term plan deliberations as item H1. So, Harry, would you like to talk to us?
So, first of all, just to reiterate, we're not asking you for decisions. We're asking you for guidance, indicative guidance. You don't formally make a decision until you've got the plan on 30th of June. In terms of getting things ready to the auditors, we need certainty on what we need to put into our costings to inform the rates and all those types of things. So this report is asking you to confirm that 90% of the decisions that you've already made, but the only thing that's changed in that time is the funding for what Kotahi, and we'll come to that in the report. So I just reiterate, there's nothing new here. This is all things that you discussed and deliberated. So with that, I'll just let Trina walk you through it.
Cool. And just before you start, we'll wait for Rita and Narita. We've started. We did it on purpose.
Yeah.
Sorry. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something. Okay, so yeah, I think we, Harry's outlined the reason why we need to do this, because there were a few things that were sort of left a little bit undecided at the deliberations last Thursday, and so we really need to see if we can nail them down a little bit further so that we can actually produce the financials for the auditors of the team. The first part of the report is really the decisions that we made in terms of the consultation document. I don't think there's no surprises there. We went with everything that was in the first option in the consultation document, except for the recycling centre, which we want to keep open, but look at investigating other options for relocating the recycling station and the green waste facility. So that's all what you discussed last week, which is fine. We've added some additional costs that we discussed last week around CapEx. We've moved the smart meters so you should recall from all of our workshops that we had a rollout on the back of the trial that's been done on smart meters for year 1, year 2 and year 3 of the long-term plan, $1 million in each year, in order to roll smart meters out to each of our towns. Now, the timing of the trial and when it's going to end, it's looking like it's not going to end until the middle of next year, which means we actually won't need to start the meter rollout. Won't be able to until year 2 of the long-term plan. So we've just pushed that CapEx out a year. So that's that one. That's item 3 under additional costs. Item 4. This is probably. I'll just come back to item 4 and just cover off the other one. So there's the solid waste officer, which we discussed that we put that in, and we put a little bit more in for the representation and rates review. We did have a little bit in there, but we just wanted to make sure that we had enough, just with changes to what we need to do with the representation review, probably more than the rates review.
Up to that point, that's all the things that were in the public deliberations. No changes. And that's what you're asking us.
Okay. Yeah. If I could just clarify with the councillors, because I thought that we had asked for the Greytown Cemetery 200K to not be put in, or be only put in once we've actually clarified.
So we had clarified.
So it seemed extremely large amount.
Yeah. Yeah, we went back to officers and we had a good discussion around that, and there really is no alternative. We need to open up this next stage in the cemetery. We've pretty much run out of space in Greytown, and so the beam for a lot of this, it's not just the roading. Actually, it's the beams that need to go in, the burial beams, and then the access ways for.
So it's more than just the road. It's
more than just the road. Yeah, which is what I was. Yeah, actually, the majority of the money is probably on those burial beams and pathways, opposed to just roading. Yeah.
Is any of this possible?
No, go on. And I'll go on.
Is anything of this coming out of the financial contributions?
We did look at that. It's hard to make a connection between burials in a cemetery and growth. But look, we did look at the definition of what the restricted reserve could be used for, and we decided it couldn't be used for this because it's really about development of new spaces as a result of growth. But it's quite specific in what it says. It's sort of regions, playgrounds, and for use around waterways and stuff like that. So we did.
I would hardly suspect that a restricted reserve, there's a lot of fun in a graveyard.
I was going to ask with 0.6, the representation and rates review. I just feel that amount that you put in there of 20,000 is a little bit low.
It's not the full amount.
It's an increase.
It's just an increase. We've just topped it up, just based on
married wards.
On married wards, and what Karen has sort of looked at and thought, okay, well, I'm probably going to need a little bit more money. So the majority of that 20,000 probably sits with Karen, and then anything else.
What's the total? Do you know what?
Oh gosh, top of the head, I think it's about 60,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then increase that 20. Can't quite.
No.
Okay.
Okay. So 80. Yeah.
On the CapEx for water meter trials or installation, can this be 100% debt funded given the status? It is.
It is 100% debt funded. Sorry, we have gone through this. This was part of all the workshops that we've had. So
just double checking that.
Yeah. So no, it is
attributable to it, so that the government will take on that debt when Three Waters occurs.
Potentially.
I really, and it's my.
It will be coded to water.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if it's only the debt that we're funding that, is that debt component in the first year, considering that it may only be 6 months of that first year, is that going to tip the rates much?
No, we're actually pushing it out, so it's.
Yeah, I know you are, but if you're only funding 6 months of the repayment of the loan, how much is that going to increase the rates by?
In year one, do you mean?
Yeah, in year one.
Well, we won't be borrowing the money in year one, we'll be borrowing it in year two now.
Yeah, I know you are. Yeah, I know you're saying you're going to push it out, but if you left it the same and it was only 6 months of the year,
okay,
what would that rate approximately difference be? Because that may be that that's not so.
There'd be depreciation as well. I can do a really quick kind of back of the bag packet.
It might be easy to leave that in.
We'll go with it.
Well, the reason that we can't is because we realistically won't be in a position to be starting the rollout until.
And remember the footnote from Audit New Zealand that said be very careful about the doability of that.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah, if there's a recommendation to push this out, I'll push it back.
Okay.
It's not much in terms of debt funding. It's probably only about 10 or 20,000 a year. But I think, to be honest, Pam, I don't think that money would be spent in year one.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why we're doing it.
Given the
It's not-
pressure on Wellington Water.
Yeah, it's not, the decision hasn't been made because of the level of rates. The decision's been made independently.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so just to confirm, so you're all happy with the 6 big decisions? Yep. And
No.
So those are the consultation decisions.
But you're not happy, do you understand?
I understand what
Cool.
you're doing, but I'm still going to vote against one of them. So just to forewarn.
this is, sorry, so there's a difference between you'll have the opportunity to make a decision about the where you head. This is just about what we include in the budgets.
Yeah.
So this is.
I understand what you're doing.
What we're asking is this a fair reflection of what the guidance you gave us. So in terms of the financial decisions. Yep. Okay, cool, that's all done. So we're saying in item 3, you're happy with all the items, but we just need to come back to item 4.
Yes, yes. Oh, that's where I'm at.
Okay, so let's come back to the Kotahi allocation. Okay, so obviously, so just to start at the top, we put in a range of requests to Kotahi, which include maintenance and improvement. So we've had advice on 2 of them, which relate to our maintenance, which is and the special purpose road. There are also capital items of improvements and the safer road to zero allocations, which is probably about another 6 million or so. That's not in here. We've had advice of what we've done so far. So what you have at the bottom here is our 2018-21 forecast was 9 million. We put in the bids in the first column, which is 13 million for maintenance, and we've been allocated 11.8 million. Now we are going to go back to what the Kotahi and question some of those figures. We're not completely sure about their decision making. We want to understand that, but in terms of being able to go back and top up that difference ourselves from rates and those types of things, we're recommending we don't do that and we simply live with the figures, but recognise we will please do.
Yep. Does that decrease our allocation of our portion of the funding of road maintenance?
Yes.
Yes, it does.
Potentially a rate decrease.
Yes, it will be a rates decrease. Look, I can't give you the figure on that. Probably the maximum will be 1%, the minimum will probably be 0.5%. The reason I can't is because we've got a piece of work that we need to go back to Kotahi about and sort of see how they have split this increase. And because CapEx will be different to OpEx will have more of an impact than CapEx. So it will just depend how those fall. So we're not happy with this. This just came out yesterday and the day before, so it's hot off the press. They did get the reason Audit New Zealand have been pushing Kotahi to put this out so that we can have properly informed long-term plans. Because they have been indicating for quite some time that they've got constraints within their budget allocations. So
that's the reason that they've put this out. This is literally, this table is all we got from them, and we have yet to get any more detail on that. So it's not very helpful giving us this, but it's an indicator to you guys at the moment. But we'll need to go back and have some discussions with them and see what that looks like.
So we'll just consider that in the area of current status quo, and then see what flows out.
Yeah, yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
You know, in their defence, there's not many bureaucrats in Wellington.
No,
we can get an increase too, which is
well, you know, three lines in a table is pretty a lot of work for them.
So what I was going to ask with that, if we get reduced funding, I mean, a slight increase of funding, but it's not as much as we anticipated doing. Does that allow us to put the ceiling of rural roads back in without changing the rate?
These changes to Waka Kotahi that we see in front of us will be less of a rates reduction than the 400,000 would be a rates increase.
And my problem with that is we've had additional from council on must-dos that would more than suck up. I mean, I think the decision not to do the road funding stands by itself unless you want to revisit it by itself. We made a decision on road funding.
Yes, and both Pam and I said we disagree. So,
here, but we get slammed here as well.
But remembering that both Pam and I disagreed. So
bear in mind, this is not just a 3-year issue. What it does, we have an asset management plan. It looks at our renewal cycles and those types of things. So this has a knock-on effect for us in terms of this. So,
yeah, I realise.
But unfortunately, we just don't have any detail to be able to give you that answer.
No, so there is a little bit of a concern, and Ewan might be able to sort of elaborate on this around maintaining our level of service on our roads. Which is probably the thing that all New Zealand will be looking at, is if we accept that we're going to reduce this budget, how much is that impacting on the level of service on our roads? And we don't have the answer to that. I think it's fair to say we also don't have the answer to that at the moment.
Yeah. We will go back to what Kotahi and see what assumptions they've made to it.
Yeah, so just to be clear, so the increase in rates could be between 0.5 and 1%.
Because remember, even though it looks like $1 million, that's spread over 3 years.
Yeah.
And also half of that's already subsidised by Kotahi, so much take that. Stuck into a cake, it's not, it's quite, I can't give you a figure.
Okay. So it's really just an item for you guys to note.
Yeah. It is a 2-note there.
Yeah. You know, you'll see that what effect that has when we do the final rates calculation to support you note. So that's where we got to at the discussion. Now the next item under item 5. I'm sorry. Okay, let's go to paragraph 4.
Yep.
Trina,
Okay, so if you look at paragraph 4, so that also leads into appendix 1, which, and I didn't put it all there because it was too much. So all the rates examples will be in appendix 1 for you all. But effectively, with the changes that we've just discussed in here, not the Waka Kotahi though, make that clear. The year-on-year increase in rates required to be collected from ratepayers in year 1 will increase by 18.85%, in year 2, 7.96%, and then it sort of drops away a little bit and peaks again in year 4 or 5, I think. But that was just to give you an indication of how that's looking. But the examples in appendix 1, I'm pretty sure they've changed by about 0.5%. Yeah, thereabouts. So that's what we're looking at the moment.
Applicant 4 for the average 350 kV residential LV.
Okay, so that's where you're up to based on discussions we had. Now, just move on to the next things, other things that we indicate. You gave us some guidance, said, can you come back to us with some information about? So the first one is when we made the decision, when you made the decision to put aside the ceiling for 3 years, we've said just put some money into the speed review. roughly how would that cost. What we didn't know at the time is whether it was budgeted already or not. So we went back and asked Tim if it's budgeted, yes it is. Okay. Yep, so there's no extra money that's needed for the speed review to be able to reduce speeds on
correct, because the speed review does actually cover the whole district and all roads. I think that was one of the concerns, that it didn't cover all roads, but it's covering all roads.
So in other words, we can do that speed review and we don't need the extra budget to do it.
Right.
Cool. So people happy with that?
Yep.
Cool. The next one. So there's a request from the Maori Standing Committee to do with mowing of Little Park. Now, at this point, we don't know what that would cost. One of the options we have is we are doing a current review, which is called section 17A. That's delivery review of how we deliver our amenities and services. So basically, what it means is, as part of that review, we could actually get an idea of what those costs are. So we would report to council with the information, and then you'd have to, that means you would have to put that into your annual plan next year. Okay, just wouldn't be able to make that decision this year. We just don't know what the costs are.
That enforces us to do an annual plan next year.
No, we have to do the annual plan, but we don't necessarily need to consult on it.
Okay,
We still need to do it.
I suppose
in other words, it becomes an internal document. It doesn't mean you have to go out and do the big splash and all that kind of stuff.
No, it's still a public document.
Just unless there's something we need to go significant about. Yeah.
And there may be that by the time we get to next year, there is something that we need to consult on, which I'm sure Karen is sitting there going, Katrina, we might be consulting.
Well, we might even be doing that with LTP next year.
I just like to make the point that the mowing of the Urupa, which is the cemeteries that belong to your marae here, I just want to make the point that these are actually ratepayers. They've been paying rates for cemeteries that certainly for decades that they've never used. So, when you actually look at it that way, I think, to me, I think it's a shame that this didn't make it through to this one.
But the problem is we don't know.
Yeah, I know.
Audit New Zealand.
But Bryce did say in that meeting as well, so that he was going through a review shortly with the people that he'd be quite happy to have a look at.
That's what I'm talking about. That's what we're
Oh,
talking about.
yeah, not with the contractors or whatever, so you'll be able to find out what the.
That's that review.
And so would the idea be to find out an actual cost and build it into the annual plan?
Remember, you also have during the, if say for instance during the year, and the costs come out and actually they're minimal, then you have a choice by your own motion to move it as unbudgeted expenditure. So you have choice here. Just right now, we don't have the information to tell you what this costs.
Thank you, Harry. Thanks for that.
Just a general comment as we move into section 5. So obviously grants from understanding and numerous other grants that have been requested. So in this LTP, this is the largest budget, a rates increase that we've had, I would say, decades, if ever. I am deeply uncomfortable about increasing it over the levels it is right now. We've debated it for the last 6 months. We've come up with, in my view, is a very high number, but I support it because already 50% is going on our waters. But I'm very uncomfortable about the cemetery, 200,000. We hated the rural roads at length, and that was only 400,000. Suddenly this 200,000 has been tossed in, which you say is imperative. So
I guess the difference, Lee, if I can just say, is that it's CapEx and it's funded from depreciation reserves. So the impact on rates is really minimal. That's the reason that I haven't made a big deal about it. It's because the impact on rates is tiny.
Okay, but that aside, I think that we'll be negligent in looking at the bulk of these grants that sit out of our grant policy, because I just think maybe next year when we've got, 7.65, we'll be in a position to consider these things. But right now, we just simply cannot afford it. And if you go look at the landowners, so if I'm thinking Greytown, I know a bit better than Martin or Featherston, but if I look at the example of rates for people who are on 250,000. That a lot of people fall into that because relatively speaking, land prices haven't gone up. It's very high. I mean, even, you know, I think of myself, the land values are relatively low. And so they've got the biggest impact, 1695. And they're the people in our community who spend the least affordable. So I'm not meaning to be difficult, or I certainly want a lot of these projects in our community to go ahead, but I just simply think we have to land and line and sand and say we simply can't afford it. Okay. It's just a luxury.
So that's exactly what we're doing, is the same reason, we're literally just taking your things that we're covering, we're asking you your advice, and you say it's your choice, we're proceeding or not.
Absolutely, these are
That's exactly
just
what we're
things that were a little bit unresolved at deliberations last week, so we just want to.
Brenda, then Pam.
Okay, my concern, I share the same concern as Ray. But the other concern is that not only are they getting a rates increase from the South Warwick District Council, they're also getting a rates increase from the Greater Warwick Council. So, well, we might be adding our whack on, but they're also adding their whack on. And that's something that we need
different
to.
councils.
It might be a different council's responsibility, but it affects the same rate card.
I was going to actually say that if we're going to put in a rates representation and a rates review, which we're going to start to do next year, then that is going to have an effect on what the rates are going, depending on the decision that's made, that could totally change the rates prediction for the following year. And so I don't think we need to put too much emphasis on the following year's rates till we know exactly how that's going to be managed or come to a point. We need to look at what we're doing for this year's rates and what services and what amenities and what physical things we are going to do to make our ratepayers and residents have a better quality of life or well-being within our community. And if that means that it costs a little bit more to get that off the ground, then I think those are the things that we need to do. Yeah, unless we can physically wait a year to do them, but there's going to be equally as many pressures next year as there are this year. And whether that's because the Three Waters has been taken away from us and the government has put on councils a yet unknown factor that we're going to have to pick up in relation to that if it goes, it doesn't change the pressures that will be involved.
And I would also, while we do hang up a bit on percentages, this is long overdue. And this is something that we could have been in a position looking at a 2% rates increase if previous LTPs had actually faced the issues we're facing. So I don't get too hung up on that percentage. We've still got a long way to go to catch up to Canada, which did make those big decisions. We'll catch up eventually.
And the other thing too is last year we didn't do anything because of COVID and we didn't know what the outcome of that was going to be. So we're basically picking up 2 years changes in 1 year.
Can I just, sorry, I do have to just stop you there a little bit, Pam. Sorry. We borrowed money to stop rates going up, but we still increased our spending within the council. So our operational budgets increased quite significantly, but we didn't pass that increase on to ratepayers, we funded it.
But we're still funding it this year.
Yeah, but we're still paying those loans back. We have to take that over year 2 to year 5 to pay it back.
Let's keep the ball rolling on. But no, that's all great comments.
Could I just make one comment on it? Look, this document that we sent out was probably the best consultation documents I've ever seen from any council anywhere.
That's what's so much engagement. Yeah.
So look, I'm sorry that the rates rises are high, and nobody wants to have rates rises high, but it was explained in nauseating detail to every single person. And I didn't read many people saying, no, don't do water. No, don't do footpaths. No, don't do the big 6 things. Okay. There was probably less than 1% of all all submissions were don't do this. The rest were get on and do it. So to me, the issue is not so much what the rates rise is, it's actually how well we do the job that we've said we're going to do. And that's on you, Harry. So.
So just to grab the conversation back, I appreciate it. Sentiment, but what we're focusing on here is the conversation about deliberations and the items you asked us to go away and come back to you with some information about. So what we're going through now is essentially 2 bits of that information. This is you. You asked us to talk with Narita and the Maori Standing Committee about the items they wanted us to consider, and so there's 1, 2, 3, 4 items here on this list. The other one was the number of applications you received, but normally funded through the grant process. And the question was, how much are we likely to have committed? Do we have enough in the grants, or should we increase the grant process? So we're just going to go through all those. So if you're happy, can we proceed? Are you happy? Can we proceed that way? Yeah. Okay, so we've just got to the mowing of the part. Some of we just don't know what those costs are. So we're going to go and investigate them, and we can report back. If they're significant, we can they need to go into the annual plan next year. If they're minor, then that's a decision you can make any time during the course of the year as unbudgeted expenditure. Cool. Okay, you happy with that? Yep. The PO for each town. Now this sits within a wider context where, which is you asked us to do some work around gateway, what gateways look like, right? And how we do that. And so it would be an epic fail if we had the beautification sign putting up "Welcome to Greytown" over here, the RSA putting up a sign "Welcome to Greytown" over here, and we celebrated our bicultural nature with PO right in the middle of everything. So what we're suggesting is we actually sit down and rationally decide. And I think Alistair was the strongest advocate for this, was a standard where we want that gateway experience to look like that celebrates our bicultural nature. I think it's a given that we need to have that, but we need to make sure we're doing that in a combination. Okay? So if you're happy, what we're suggesting is we need to really do work first of all to scope what that looks like, and get some consultation. And it would lead to capital expenditure in year 2. Yeah, so we think we can do that with community boards. I don't think there's a whole lot of extra work that's needed to.
Community boards, iwi,
could we also?
stakeholders.
So in other words, we just do a scope on what is the experience that community wants their gateways to.
I think it's really important to talk to community boards, because if you look at Greytown, they're set to go, and I'm really holding the reins back, and I'm really struggling to say stop.
And you would agree, and I think it's something that.
So the commitment that we need to do is put into the year two funding to do where we come out of that space. So we're telling people we're serious.
Can we look at other funding?
Well, can we take? Can we put a
Creative museums?
Can we?
Absolutely, but I just think it's prudent. Yeah, I think it's prudent just to put something. If we're going to go out and talk to people, if we haven't put any capital expenditure into year 2.
Can we put a moratorium on community boards spending money on a gateway sign until this is done? Because at the moment, I'm sure Greytown Community Board are going to go out and do it, regardless of what Rebecca and I say.
It's not the discussion for today. The discussion here is a request from Maori Standing Committee that we celebrate our place. But we're just saying we need to do that in the context of all the other requests that people are asking for place. We want something that symbolises the bicultural nature of South Waitangi around the district without any doubt. So we just need to make sure we're not ending up with some groups putting things all over.
So the standing committee, Maori Standing Committee, requested a budget of 90. We are looking at 100 year 2, year 3. Are we happy with that?
Can we ask Narita?
Yep. Narita, you happy with
that? Actually, you've been at our table for two years at least. About, when you arrive in Wairarapa, there's nothing to tell you that Māori actually live here, that there's a whakapapa of that region. It's sort of colonial, these towns are all designed in a colonial way, aesthetically, in every which way. So we, just knowing that we've had some pricing from Carver, who would do two waharoa around the Greytown Tanganyika River Bridge, the cycle bridge, one either side at 40,000. So just sort of using that kind of figure, thinking, well, so you need some money to actually scope that job, get the design, do the consultation. But like you guys are saying now, you know, you've got Grayton community boards involved in that and these other groups, and so everybody wants some sort of representation, and it's important to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how we'd scoped it, thinking only literally around Po to define the cultural element of Wairarapa. But of course, there's other aspects. So I guess it's, I like that you've actually put some working money into it, that you're thinking about scoping in year 2 and 3.
That's right.
It has to be combined. I think it's a job for somebody though. It's hard for members of community boards and Māori standing committee to get together and get the same ideas going. Maybe an individual who then coordinates with everything. It's hard. It's a big chunk out of people's time.
I suppose where we're going, Rita, is that you know, it's a request to the LTP. It's about year due to spacing. So we're just simply saying we want to build it into the LTP. We just don't think year 1, for all those other reasons, we can come up with this, but we will fund it.
That makes sense.
Yeah, you're happy with that? Yeah. Okay. So everyone happy that we put some capex into year 2, 3? For gateway treatment, including 5. Thank you. 523, the walking, cycling and vehicle access. So the suggestion here, we can progress this through internal resourcing and Māori liaison budgets.
I'm not sure.
Can we do that through Māori liaison budgets, do you think?
This is a Karen comment, so Karen, sorry.
Yeah, so it's my understanding that the reserve is owned by the Settlement Trust, and so we would need to progress any work with them, you know, through council and through the Māori liaison committee through to the trust.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so it's not our land.
Sorry, yes.
I'm not against the idea, but ongoing maintenance, how do we incorporate that?
Yeah, I think
it's great to have these, but ongoing maintenance.
It's already been answered because it's not our land, so it'll be Greater Wellington or DOC. Greater Wellington, but I think, you know, if it's on their land, it's their responsibility.
So, but Rangitane have flagged it as well. They're looking at Whango. They've listed all those significant sites. Did you read this submission? And they said, yeah, significant sites. And I was interested to realise that Whango was one of the ones that Rangitane say is their significant site. So it would probably be that we work with Rangitane to then with Greater Wellington to open that back up.
I think on the Wairarapa Moana governance group, there is a lot of money put aside for access to the lake bed and boardwalks, etc. So I would assume that this would actually come under that funding platform, which is quite significant.
So they were talking about this just the other day about access and boardwalks and cycling trails and all sorts of things down there.
So look, my suggestion at this stage is that because we don't own the land, is that we have discussion about the iwi liaison and the role there. That's where the perfect role to work between parties to try and progress this one.
Can I just make a brief comment, Narita? Yesterday we had the YTAG meeting, which was the Wairarapa Trails Action Group, and they presented us with the draft master plan, which is all the way from Featherston right up to the whole of the Wairarapa. So it may be that project overlays in there somewhere, so it could, I think, be useful to.
It would be helpful. We would support
to work together, because I'm sure there could be some overlaps which may have financial impacts as well.
It's just who does it, and so from reading Rangitane's submission, actually the Settlement Trust, it's one of their listed places as a significant site. So if anyone can open it back up again, it's their conversation to have, isn't it?
And that's always we can work with them.
But it's good that we flagged it all, because I didn't know that was part of Rangitane, the Settlement Trust. So yeah, that's, you know, that brings it to the surface. So.
Okay, so memorial to acknowledge fallen Maori soldiers.
I have a comment on that one.
Yeah.
I think it's not a smart thing to do. Speaking as a veteran, our fallen soldiers are not differentiated by race, creed, colour or anything. Our Defence Forces leading New Zealand in multiculturalism, and the way that we look at this, the new memorials that are coming in, we don't allocate or we don't annotate by unit, because a soldier is a fallen soldier no matter which part they come from. So it's all together. They're buried in the same cemeteries together, side by side. And I think that's how we should remember our soldiers, regardless of creed or culture. And I know that down at Papua there is an honours board, and when I was with the RSA, we were very keen to get those soldiers put up into Soldiers Memorial Park as well, so to bring that together. So that's my view anyway. Pretty important.
Are we talking about Italian here?
Yeah, we are talking about Māori soldiers that have fought in the Second World War, who returned to New Zealand to find their land had been taken, who didn't receive pensions like Pākehā soldiers did, who fought just as hard as any other soldier on those days. And for some reason, the Cenotaph in Waitanapa only acknowledge Pākehā soldiers. So,
and look, I acknowledge that, absolutely. And if you look at the new memorial that's going to be built in Greytown, that is going to actually acknowledge all soldiers, regardless of creed or culture. That's the new thing. I think things like this need to be spoken with the RSA in Wellington before we go down.
If we can let Marita finish.
yeah, well, there was some real scope in that. I mean, in Whanapiti, it was that whole project where the 66 medals were returned to the descendants of fallen Māori soldiers who never received their medals. So that's another thing, they never received their medals. So what happens when a soldier fights next to a Pākehā soldier in a war that isn't their war, but doesn't receive the medal like their peer just did and presented to them? There's a certain amount of, there's mana that is lost in that. So, it's just another way that we stay separated, that we stay, you're lesser than me. And these sorts of things just carry down through generations. When I talk to Papua whānau, they talk about their uncle. His photo is still on the wall of the house that he built and owns, and the descendants are still in the house now. They go down to the cemetery, they wash the headstones, they mow the lawns and do the weeds, trimming and everything. That's that whānau that have to find time in their busy lives working to do that, to remember their uncle. He should have had medals, he never received them. He won't be the only one. I just think this is just one of those things where it's also about how do we say to our next generation that we acknowledge your koro, your grandfather, your great-grandfather for the efforts they did as well, because at the moment there's nothing to tell them.
That they were even involved in the war.
Can we have advice though on your input from the New Zealand Defence Force or from Heritage New Zealand or from MCA or from RSA on their commitment to this sort of acknowledgement?
The funding could come from them.
Because I know that it is the council's responsibility for war memorials, but this is potentially a similar project.
Yeah, it is, and I totally see it as being that too. And I mean, I'd like to see the same thing that happened in Tairāwhiti, where someone actually went out and did that research and found those soldiers and found their families, and I actually have someone who'd be perfect for that job.
But what I'm saying is, how much should we as a council commit when there is responsibility or onus in other areas as well?
Good point. I guess, there is so many entities involved in this, including the New Zealand Army. But is it just something to say that council support the idea in principle that there is some sort of acknowledgement to acknowledge Māori soldiers?
So we do just that. So we put something into the script of the LTP that says we support this. The question is, do you want to put a funding allocation? So it strikes me we're not going to make a decision today. So there's work that needs to be done, as Alex, to find a suitable way to achieve the outcome.
Quite right.
But it may not be the council, it may be a party of people.
Yeah, I totally get that. It's good to actually flesh this out too, because I asked the question. So, but what is the project that's happening in Greytown, Alison?
So the Greytown RSA has started a project probably about 6-7 years ago now, at least, to redo Soldiers Memorial Baths Memorial. And what it will have, it'll have a memorial that's done, but with glass etching, glass plates with all the fallen soldiers and a glass panel for each wall. So that there will be room, God forbid if we actually have more, that we can acknowledge those, and it'll incorporate all the people from within the district that that have fallen, not just parking.
It's quite significant. I think
It is- it is.
120 grand. So it's
Something like that,
something
yeah.
like
It's only by the RSA, isn't it?
No, they're going to community raise the money.
They'll come to us eventually.
They will come. They will come again. But it's a memorial that it's not a World War II. It started off as a World War II memorial. It's now a war memorial.
That might be part of the picture that we talk. That's
Well,
how-
maybe that needs to be articulated, for Māori standing, because it's the committee that are bringing it forward.
And that's when you put. That's what I mean. You've got to talk to RSA and those sorts of things.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I
still
thought
doesn't
that was the
include
scope of it as well.
us talking about memorials, multiple for Māori soldiers, whether that becomes part of the solution, we're still going to have that conversation.
So I think activity this year is explore it, so that we think about the context of the end of next year.
Because there will be no funding for this year, but in the same way as the
The
post.
work will get done. It's a question. Karen, do you think this is work we can do in-house?
Yeah, I think so. I think certainly something collectively we can do.
Okay, so we'll do the work.
As in a letter of support or something, what do you mean by the work?
Actually, to collate and get the meetings together and start discussing the solutions. Yeah.
With all RSAs and with all people.
Well, that's up to the group to actually find out who needs to be consulted.
Yeah, correct. Because I know Featherston RSA, the Māori Battalion soldiers are at Featherston Cemetery on the right-hand side along the fence line.
Yeah.
There's a number of them there, but there's nothing to indicate that they're there.
We're doing a memorial every year there now, so it is building. I mean,
There's nothing.
So the question we're going to come back to, I presume, is I'm going to look at what's the most fitting way to acknowledge Māori soldiers, right? And work on what solution would work with all sorts of parties, which may be a memorial or maybe addition to the memorial, I don't know. But the commitments do. Yep.
How do you feel about that? I mean, I think that's, I didn't know that was even on the cards. 6 years work.
Okay, so
my whole life's been with Māori soldiers beside me. So it's.
You okay with
Absolutely, I think it needs to be done. Absolutely.
So is this budget what we wanted? Is this 10K and then 2 times 20K, or is that?
No, it's no budget.
No, budget.
We're doing the work in-house. We're recording the activity to be done.
Yeah. Don't forget the in-house activity still.
But if the result is that we need to do it, I mean, if we're coming back.
We're coming to the end.
The Purana Hall Honours Board has all Māori that went to war on it, along with Pākehā.
Right. Okay, so now the next question is for Māori liaison. So we've originally put a budget bid in for 90, and the MSC have requested a budget for 150K. Could Marita's come back to us with the explanation of that? Karen, can I just ask you what your thoughts are about this? Because part of this, Marita, no disrespect, is that there's we've actually expanded Karen's team, so we've got a bit more capacity in Karen's team to do some of the policy development that we would envisage that we needed to resource. So there's work we can do in-house to do this work, because Karen's team is increased by 1, basically. So we also have we'll have the liaison role as well. So we actually have some in-house capacity. So when I was talking to Karen and Katrina about this, we think there's an increase that's needed over 90K, but we don't think it's all the way up to the 150. And we think we're probably at about 20-25K would be about right. Recognising that we would do so that's an increase on the 90K, so that's 110 to 115, 110 to 115K. Aaron, do you think that feels about right, given that we can beat the balance in house?
So there's a couple of things. I think, yes, there will be more capacity in-house to do policy work. I do take the point from Nerida and the Māori Standing Committee that, we will need obviously expert input into that. I think it's difficult to understand at this point the extent of the policy work and the internal processes without having undertaken the cultural audit. So I do think that there is value in that upfront funding in order to be able to assess what that programme of work is going forward. And so a lot of things will fall out of that. And I think in terms of the, and I'll ask Katrina to come in after I've finished around sort of funding and budget that we talked about. My initial assessment of 90,000 was after a brief discussion with Nerida, because of course, we do need to sit down with the Māori Standing Committee and identify what it is moving forward, how it looks. But our initial assessment was around a part-time Māori liaison person, and that person was envisaged to do initial liaison work and potentially some initial sort of triaging. I know we hate that word, but triaging work for RMA discussions. And then there was some additional funding then set aside for professional advice on for iwi input into RMA decisions and consenting. And then a small budget set aside for any additional work. So I know that Nerida's come back and has put in some funding for, and it looks to me like a full-time post. I don't think we have any disagreement around the level of the Māori liaison person, but whether that ongoing work would be a part-time or a full-time post, I'm not quite sure about. And of course, it's difficult to understand without knowing what the views are around the extent of the policy work. So that's kind of where my thoughts were on the matter. And Katrina, it would be good to hear your views.
Yeah, so Karen and I sat down the other day and looked at this, and this was before we got the additional information from the reader. So we looked at the Māori Standing Committee submission and sort of framed up what we thought that this scope of this work looks like. And we were thinking we should be setting aside $50,000 in the first year to look at, as Karen said, that scoping and the audit of what we need. In terms of a person, the budgets that we came up with were the role would sit between 85 and 95,000 a year as an FTE, and we were looking at a 0.75 FTE for that, and that this role wouldn't start until mid-year after that scoping and audit work had been done. The person could, so effectively that meant, when you extrapolate that all out, that there's a component of 35,000 in there for that part-time role for the later half of the 6 months of the financial year. And they would pick up some of that policy and strategy work, because many councils around New Zealand have all these policies already. And of course, they would need to be they would need to come through the Māori Standing Committee and make sure that iwi were happy with them. But a lot of that work is already out there. And so we don't think we need to essentially reinvent the wheel, so to speak. And then we've also got $20,000 a year ongoing for RMA work. So that's for iwi to, as Karen said, to actually help with those RMA decisions that need to be made. And then, as Karen said, a small $10,000 budget a year for just project work. That's what that comes to 115,000. And then ongoing, would be RMA, of course, at 20,000 a year. The salary of between 70 and 75, that would be a 0.75 FTE, and then that project budget each year of 10,000, which is about ongoing about 100,000 a year. So that's what we sort of came up with.
But I'd like to reiterate Katrina's point that, we talked about this before we had Nerida's information, and, we have asked, and the council have asked for Māori Standing Committee to have input into that, and that was what we wanted to do anyway. So it's for council to have those discussions around what that budget should be appropriately set at.
Can I just quickly clarify, Karen, you said about one of the first things that we needed to do was that cultural audit. Can you tell me what feedback you've had and whether or not we've got a date yet on that? Because it has been quite some time.
Yes, no, I did have a phone call with Hone, and I followed up with an email. He asked me to clarify with him around that, but I haven't heard back from him. So I will chase him for an update before the Māori Standing Committee meeting next week.
Oh, fantastic, thank you.
So I've got a couple of questions here, but with that audit, was there money put aside in the Māori Standing Committee budget for that cultural audit, and is that being included in our?
It's already, there is already some budget.
Oh, sorry, yeah, aside so last.
If we are going to go with a representation review, wouldn't it be better to have any Māori liaison officer in place and embedded before that started?
Yep.
So perhaps the mid-year employment might be a bit late in doing that, but we need to be looking pretty quickly.
Could we not get a consultant in or a?
Let's not go consultant.
Because we want to, well, I really think the cultural audit's the place to start, like what Karen said.
Under different roles to the person, the ongoing and the scoping.
Yeah, but that Māori liaison is going to be important for representation next year.
You want continuity.
Yeah, so as the process is progressed along, and we should have had the audit last year, then we would have known our baseline, but that didn't happen. And so now as things have progressed along and our Māori boards are jumping up and down, so now this role that, I mean, it is an individual. I am thinking of as a person in this role to do this foundation work, and these are areas actually. Yeah, bless you guys, but you guys aren't specialised in this Māori space, you know. And for us to do this really well and set that foundation right, you need someone that actually is experienced in these spaces around Māori policy, around treaty settlement, you know, because it is a prickly beast. I mean, you've already just experienced that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, but here's the problem we've got is like Cardigan District Council had been advertising for a Māori liaison officer for 8 months and haven't found anyone.
Yeah.
So are we even going to be?
That's, I mean, that's why I know we could, that could come about. But the thing is, you've got to make that package attractive to start with. Yeah. And coming to live in Marthaborough, you know, you need to be mindful of that.
So is this part of? So I'm going to ask you a good section question here. But when we got the initial response from Māori Standing Committee, they were talking 90, 100 for a Māori liaison. And that's gone to 150. Can you talk us more around that?
I don't give you that. Sorry, I only sent this through yesterday afternoon, so you guys probably need to.
Yeah, I've seen it, but I'm just wondering why it's a considerable jump at a very late stage in LTP. I'm not complaining, it's just
yeah, but like I said, you know, when you start to look at people that do this role as their day job, you know, they're paid really competitively. It's quite skilled. It comes with a lot of experience. And so that's really where that rate is coming from, $135 an hour plus GC. I know what you're thinking because I'm freaking out too, but I think we've got to do this stuff really, really well, like not to be questioned on because we're nailing it. And, but, you know, I mean, I do have someone in mind for this role and I know the background that he has and I know the skill set he has. And I think he'll work really well with this council as well. He works extremely well with Māori Standing Committee, but he'd work really well with you guys. I know it's a big push, but also we've waited a long time. You know, Māori have waited a long time for a council to value us. We've had decades and decades of councils that have marginalised us, put us to the side, deal with you later, throw you a little bone, you know. So it's part of that too. And I just sort of feel like I've got faith in this council, and I feel like there's a bit of faith going the other way as well. And I mean, I can see that's hard.
It's just that we need to question public money all the time. Yeah. So don't get it. It's just the fact that we're putting some rigor around this.
I know, but
are you? Could you do this in the suggested
like in the 110
from Katrina and Karen at about 120?
I think I don't know if I could even get the person to come through the door to get that. You know, this is a really specialised area, and
so Narita, just looking at your paper, just to sums with your hours, your approximate hours, that's about half an FTE in terms of the hours you've come up with. So, so what, 1,600 hours a year for a normal work year, and there's about 800 hours here roughly. So you know, when we're talking sort of 75,000 or whatever, that's the equivalent of $150,000 a year salary. So that's a big salary for the council. So
yeah, I know.
So you know, I struggle with the $135 an hour for the work. You know, and I understand the work's really important, but when you say what it's going to take, and it's a half job according to the hours. That's $140,000 a year.
You mentioned it's like stretching that person out for the whole year in those hours, because that's the other thing with working, there's so much engagement involved in here with iwi, marae, hapu, and these things. He might be able to start that engagement in July, but not actually get a meeting with that hapu or that marae until October. It's the nature of the beast too, so you've got to keep allowing for that time for engagement and consultation. With Māori, takes a long time because you've got to build the trust in there as well.
I do understand that, but I'm not sure we can budget 100% of, you know, when you say here's the job, but we're going to add another 100% onto it, becomes really hard to justify. So that's the
and that's what it's got 110K.
Can I say, I think, Alistair, I think we need to quantify what you're saying. If somebody's charging $135 an hour, then they're doing that as a consultant.
Yeah.
So a consultant pays their own PAYE, they pay their own insurance, they pay their own everything. Yeah.
But we're talking about an employee, not a
consultant.
Yeah, that is literally.
So are we talking about this person as employing them as a consultant, or are we talking about this increasing our FTE by this person's salary? Because they're two different ways of looking at it. Because if it's a consultant, they're only going to charge for the hours that they actually work, whereas an employee, we're going to be paying them all the time, and we're going to do holiday pay and PAYE and their own their ACC and all that sort of jazz. So this, you know, we need to clarify the way that we're actually looking at this person to get a better understanding of what it is physically going to cost council. So if it's a consultant, in the first year, we may only use him for X number of hours, but in the second year, we're thinking of employing a person, that's where the greater hours could be. But if we're doing a employee, well, then we're going to be paying them that same amount of money on an even keel.
That's right. That was the thinking too, Pam. That is actually a contractor start date, finish date. This is what needs to be achieved over that time period. I mean, the person would put through a proposal for you to show you the breakdown on what they'll achieve at a certain timeline, and then then we'd be merging in our transition time the next person who would then take over the role, which is a scale salary.
So can I ask a question? So if you're saying, you know, so we take that. So the consultant does the setup work, but the year 2, 3 cost will not be, there'll be staff, be much more reduced.
Yeah.
So what you're doing, you're saying there's a fee to get the work done up front, and then we employ someone, and that cost will go down.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, we need that foundation within the council. We need actually the policies embedded within council. And you know, that's that skill set that I'm talking about. And actually, you really need someone that has that experience in that space. And also, it's safety for all of us. You know,
you can see this is a massive.
The year one.
But then if it's a consultant, we can say exactly what we want to spend in that first year, and then work out the number of hours we're going to get for that. And if it's going to be more than that they need in the first year, whether because Karen's got some extra FTE in her role, whether that some of the groundwork and that can be done.
I'd like to think that we can borrow from other councils' experience and research at a very high level from the Karen's department to assist. Because every council is unique, but there's some governance.
No one builds a policy from scratch. I mean, if we're looking for any policy, the first thing we do is we go to other councils.
I'm just wondering whether there is a bit of wiggle room here from an allocation.
Well, so
and then pay. Sorry, the contract.
So just a question: did you budget in these calculations 90,000? It's in there.
90,000 is in the long-term plan.
And that's part of the rates.
Yeah, absolutely.
So all we're talking about is
as additional. Yeah.
Thank you.
60K.
for year one, and then the second year, that would be a scale salary, a working budget added in there, which of course that's
Our year one's the one where all our costs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, carry on, sorry.
Yeah, what else to say, but I just feel it's so important and so important going forward, and it might be this is the line drawn in the sand and just, you know, get it right going forward. It's a space that you just don't want to keep getting tripped up on. I don't particularly enjoy it either. Yeah, in Māori Standing Committee, it's quite a hard space for us to be in because there's no embedded support within the council because you guys haven't got it yet. And so even we don't have the policies to stand on, we don't have. Yeah, some things are really good because I've noticed it's saved us a few times. Just even the standing orders have been, you know, good for us and things like that. But it just, yeah.
So, so what's the hourly rate? Did you say?
That's the hourly rates at 100.
That's we pay a contract, our HR contract about those types of rates. That is not unusual for specialists. That's quite normal a rate.
I think
that's unreasonable. And given, you know, I mean, I think, you know, it's difficult because we are a constrained environment. This is the one shot. We just put a whole lot of money, a whole lot of our reputation on getting our representation review, the partnership alignment, around the discussion we just had about Māori wards, all those types of things. You know, would be done to undercook the capability we think we need. We don't have it. You know, we just don't have it. And that's the Readers Council. It's just that if you want someone to take us into this world, we've got to have someone who really knows their stuff. So that's the counterbalance here.
Do you see the contract as full-time in that first year?
No,
so
800 hours.
Yeah, that's right.
No, full-time is 2,080 hours, not 1,600 hours. I don't know.
I took holidays off.
No, that is.
Yeah, no, I took 4 weeks off.
Goal.
Sorry.
I think it'd be.
I was being generous.
Yeah, but it's still.
Just something.
Okay.
Because we all feel in our, well, I'm getting the feeling that we feel that this is very important, what Reed is asking, to give us the basis to go forward. So I'm going to suggest something that is totally off the block, in that we're setting aside some money for grants for next year. I think we take the money that we need from the grants committee and put it into the Maori liaison officer. I feel that for a council, for ourselves, that is going to give us more benefit, more, if you want to say it, kudos within our community, that we're going to be doing something that is for everybody. Because this isn't just going to be for Maori people, it's going to be for all of us. I'm emotional. And I feel that our grant money would be better spent having that person within our group to advise us going forward, especially with this looking at Maori wards, than giving money to lots of other little pieces that, although they give benefit to it, I feel this is more important.
Okay, I mean, that's an interesting, that's left field, but I would rather we actually face this as a council and disguise it and underfund other community organisations that also require us. We're really getting thin on the ground on grants anyway. You're saying that you're wiping all discretionary grants.
Just for year one, while we get this
Well,
sorted.
I would rather face it as instead of hide it. Yeah, I'd rather put it into the council LTP. I really.
Can I suggest we just throw in another $30,000 into it?
No, we need
Start
to
with.
find out what the 30, I mean.
What would $30,000 do, Karen?
From
Katrina?
Reader,
What would $30,000
is whether or not the 30 grand is going to be, it's a horse with 3 horseshoes on. You know, it's useless.
Yeah, yeah, well, I mean, I'd like to go back and be able to talk to the committee and the person.
We haven't got time.
Oh, so is it a question?
Actually, we can.
We're meeting on next week.
sorry, take.
Okay, so,
So is the figure 30 on top of 90? Is that-
yeah, so 135 times 800 is 108.
Would 120 do the job, or is that still going to do it, leave it short?
You're asking me.
Yeah, we all have to make it.
This, 135 times 800.
Yeah, no,
So it gives us a wiggle room.
We've got to, you know, but you might say, no, actually, we've thought this through really hard, and that is the absolute minimum. Tell us where there's some fat that you can say, okay, we could pull this back and still achieve the goal.
Okay, I'd probably at the very least I'd be saying 130.
Guys,
I can live with that.
Can you live with that?
Can we propose for each town, could we push those out?
CapEx. Yeah. I'm happy with.
I can live with that.
I can live with that.
Look, guys, I've got to go, but I'm happy with it.
Will your board standing committee, which I said on.
Yeah, we'll talk about it on the.
Do you think
I
that's
think so,
going?
I think so. I think.
Are we don't want to feel like we're undervaluing
Yeah.
all that we're required to do.
I don't think
Well,
30,000. I don't think that's undervaluing.
I think we've all had to pull our belts.
I respect the board standing committee, but as a council, it's going against one of the recommendations. That's why I'm nervous about this. I need to have your support that one thing is going to do it.
I'm pretty sure that will probably be okay. I just have to work within those means, won't you? Just
Okay.
double hard.
I can help shape, we can help shape.
So can we give some guidance to Katrina to add another 40 into that 90?
Yep.
Okay.
Thank you, Katrina.
Thank you.
I know it's a great place. I think all the time.
Thanks, Rita.
Cool, we've got, Chief, you've got to go, I'm afraid.
We need to discuss grants.
Chief is gone.
That's the last one.
Alistair's got to go, so let's just get this done.
It's really
Do
quick.
we have to,
Really
do
simple.
we have to quickly call it though, it's 3 o'clock?
What do you mean?
6 hours.
Oh, that's right, we start at 10.
So just,
I wish I could call my day up.
okay, guys, so then
No, we have to-
I need to be out of here as well. Guys, put down, drill it off 2 times, 3 times.
Suzanne.
Not so- I know,
Right.
You recall, very simply, you've got grants, we currently have 100, whatever is the figures, 170K.
That's 75.
And 75 for you.
Yeah.
You had Dark Sky Society who asked for 10 to 13,000 per annum.
Yeah, it was a little bit unclear how much they wanted, but
30,000 over 2 years. So you're looking at about 25K. Can you live within that figure of 170K? Here's the ones you're, there's a list, or do you want to increase it by a portion?
Could I please say, again, I am unhappy with the amount of money we give Aratoi when we have 4 museums here.
So all I did here was I said,
Just for example.
if there's going to be some organisations that we enter into MOUs with, then these are the ones that are likely to be, and this is what we have done previously in terms of.
And
I understand that.
It's a discussion within the grants, hasn't happened.
Yeah, I know.
Remember, you wanted an indication of what we would likely to commit long term to give you a sense of the size and materiality comes discretion. So your choices are you don't increase it, and they just, and so you if you just say apply for the grants, those 2 things come in and they extend and fall on their own merit against everything else. Just leave it as that's, or you increase the amount that's in the grants for a portion of that, so it gives you a bit more wiggle room if you want to.
Okay.
My feelings about this have not changed. Grants are a nice to have, but it's not an essential, it's not a need. You know.
I think it's necessary for our full well-being support.
We are doing enough for our full well-being support under the LTP.
I disagree. And everyone's allowed their opinion.
Yeah.
Right? But I think this is, and we're shrinking every year. The discussions we have in the grant subcommittee are pretty vigorous. Vigorous.
Rigorous and vigorous.
Seriously, it's staff do not have a this is
No.
So all we just.
I'm happy for you to leave if you want to.
Okay. You're now acting CEO.
Okay.
To the end of this meeting.
So this is just a example of possible MOUs which could change. So that leaves us 107,000. I've left aside the youth grant for a moment. So I would suggest Dark Sky and Pacifica If they just apply for a grant, as before, fits with
I think
the grant.
I think we can fit within, like, I think we've got a bit of discussion on we've done over that 30 weeks of Warrington.
Yeah, it is.
And really, should this be?
Remember that was over half, it was over 2 years.
Yeah.
No, random.
So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that area. It doesn't say he's going to get 30.
Yeah, it's just about whether you think you need to increase that.
I'm comfortable with what it is at the moment. Everyone?
Yeah.
It just makes harder decisions.
Who wants more? You want more?
I was going to say this, what I was going to ask was all of these grants that we've got listed here with MOUs don't have any MOUs under there for anything with regard to youth. Was there anything in there that could be?
It could be, Pam. I don't know. All I did was I had a look because I wanted to give you an indication. If you've got 170K as a budget, and reasonably likely that we would enter into all of these organisations with MOUs, then really you've got to take this off your discretionary budget.
Yeah.
So you'd only have about $100,000 left to play with.
Yeah.
So that was just really giving an indication of what it could look like. I had a look at the youth grant ones to see if there was, because most of the MOUs would likely be for museums and that sort of thing that they need an ongoing operational costs. So that could be half of that we enter into. It could be
Sharing that grants, I think, I think we can wiggle this. I think we can do it under the existing budget. It just will be, it gets harder every year, but that's fine, because then it'll actually make sure that we're giving the money correctly.
Yeah, and you'll have to think very carefully about the MOUs that you enter into.
Yep.
And I think maybe if we asked ourselves the question that if we were sitting at the grants committee table and someone came in and asked for 30,000 a year, I mean, I think we'd automatically go, no, we can't afford that.
Yeah.
How ridiculous. So if you overlay the thinking of that, and we've still got the youth money that hasn't been accounted for here. I'm comfortable with it not increasing myself.
And this in fact could go down.
Yeah, so in total, we're looking at 245,000 set aside for grants.
Yeah, I'm fine.
Probably about 1.5% rates.
Yeah.
But that's included in the rate.
That's included in the budget post, if you want to make that more.
Okay, we'll keep it as it is. Pip?
I agree.
I nearly said no.
So weird. No one calls me that.
When we say we keep it as it is, are we saying that, oh, you go ahead with the MOUs or?
No, we're just saying about the 245,000.
Just clarifying.
We haven't got to be yet.
And that will be part of the grant.
Yeah, and that's included in the rates increase, all budgeted.
All of this is budgeted, the 145,000 is budgeted. The MOUs are, because the grants policy is changing, subject to approval for this long-term plan, and that will allow organisations to enter into MOUs for this. So that gives them surety around ongoing operational costs, the museums and things like that are always asking us for the same amount of money or thereabouts each year. So that's what that's about. And so yeah, I was just indicating what that might look like.
Yeah, I think that's good.
Right, is that it?
No.
Yeah.
No.
Civic
Civic ceremonies.
Right, okay. This is probably one that I've caused.
Another 30, don't you? 10 per, no.
I've suggested that we probably need another 7K into civic ceremonies to cope with 3 to 4 Anzac parades in the South Island. That's really a bit more funding, increasing costs in food and whatever, plus traffic management.
So is that putting that up to 15K?
Yeah.
That includes things like the scenes now.
The machines will still, we're coping with that.
Yeah, the thing is that 8K is.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So, but
Have we costed this out? Have we costed it out?
No, look, I think what I would think that you should do is not commit to how you spend the budget, but just to commit to a budget, and then you can make the decisions on how you spend that budget. As they come up.
Harry asked me, what do you think since I'm putting this in, and I worked out what I went through my emails for all the 4 Anzac events, plus also bearing in mind what they're talking about with regards to increasing the scenes profile, and businesses getting a bit bigger, kept going, okay, these are all pressures on a very limited civic ceremony budget.
So I've included Martinborough in that because I don't do mine by email, I only do what
I went through it all, because at some stage you're going to have to have a template.
Yes, I know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
The only thing I don't appreciate about the civic ceremonies is that they pushed it at the Anzac rate.
That's right.
And now you're bringing it to us like this.
I'm not bringing it, I'm just saying there's an issue here, right? I'm saying we've got an issue. If we don't budget for it, then we're going to get caught.
I think we
And I
should
can see it looming.
I like
You pick it up and you tell us what it should be. I've got no problem with that.
Sorry, can I, well, if we don't include citizenship things?
It includes anything.
Anything, I think, so it would definitely include citizenships, which we're sort of put on hold because of COVID. Yeah, this is where I think that you should set a budget and then not kind of just say we're going to do the traffic management. Or the Anzac parade here and here, because those costs could escalate quite significantly out of control. And so you're better off to go, we're going to increase the budget to this. And then we'll slice it and dice it how we feel.
That's always the issue, because we're not, it might be that we don't spend it.
Are we going to have an awards ceremony this year?
Yes, I've asked at Museum for a date to be set, and I seem to be getting pushback. So I shall assist.
So do we have a budget for that?
It was
It would be
15,000 is enough.
Because your citizenship can cost you.
You would need to have at least 20,000.
For what?
Because if you're going to do your civic ceremonies, you're going to do Anzac, and you do your awards in there, then you basically you haven't got enough.
The civic awards are every 2 years, so as long as we can roll that budget over, so be it. But I think like, and if you pick a number, I'm thinking 15 should do it.
Yeah.
Because really, I tend to have a close eye on that budget, which I work with Barb and Harry on. Can we do this? Can we do this? Can we do this? If you want to put more in, great.
No, I think 15 is a good place to start. Look, we'll be able to tell, won't we, by the time for the next annual plan?
I'm not in a position to tell you what it would be, but I know how much it costs for traffic management.
Well, should it be more?
And that's my concern.
Well, do it, tell us.
No, I do not have those figures, just like you don't have those figures.
Exactly, so we put a budget in.
Just to put your mind at ease, for the Christmas parade, it was near on $2,000. And that was for a cheap ass, risky traffic management.
But we don't necessarily, as council,
It's gonna
have
get
a
worse.
responsibility for Christmas parade.
It is. No, but that's an example of how much traffic.
Greytown,
it
what
costs.
did Greytown pay for the ride?
In the past, Rotary
Rotary
given a grant.
So anyway, okay, round the table, let's see what that budget should be. We're not saying we're going to spend it.
Sorry.
Put a figure on it. You shouldn't even be putting me in a position without me giving me thoughts about being the investigator. So I'm not even that eager in that discussion. So you can't bring this to the table without actually knowing what this is.
Would we and stub our toe? Or do we try and put?
Let's see, I reckon 15. Great.
I'm happy with.
Anyone else?
I'm 20.
I'll go 15.
I abstain. I'm just so forget about it, mate.
It's a great abstainer. I will go with, if we could look at 15, subject to confirmation.
Yeah, thank you. Okay. At least you get the decision on the table rather than
nothing on the table. Okay, meeting closed.
Thank you. I'm sorry, Katrina. Look, it's the glare. Glare that was just coming through. And the yawn.
You finished? We're done.
Same thing.
Oh.